Ladies and gentlemen, announcing the arrival of the Secretary of National Defense, the Honorable 𝗬𝗪𝗂 𝗕𝗪𝗂𝗍 Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the Philippine National Anthem and for the prayers of all faith.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Loving and gracious Creator, we gather before you today representing diverse paths of faith and belief, coming together in unity and respect. We acknowledge and honor the richness and beauty found in the diversity of our religious traditions. We seek your presence and guidance as we begin this meeting. We recognize that you are the source of wisdom, understanding, and harmony. We humbly ask that you bless our time together, enabling us to work cooperatively and to foster an environment of mutual understanding, respect, and collaboration. As we come from different religious backgrounds, we celebrate the unique perspectives and experiences that each person brings to this gathering. May we approach one another with open hearts and open minds, embracing the opportunity to learn from each other and to grow an appreciation for the tapestry of faith that exists among us. We ask for your guidance, Divine Source, to help us listen attentively and emphatically to one another. Grant us the ability to truly hear and understand different viewpoints, recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every individual present. In this meeting, we acknowledge that our shared purpose is to work together for the betterment of our communities and the world. Help us find common ground, to seek common goals, and to discover solutions that honor the values of justice, compassion, and inclusivity. May our deliberations be marked by harmony and cooperation, free from prejudice and judgment. May our words be spoken with kindness and humility, fostering an atmosphere of trust and mutual support. We express our gratitude for the opportunity to gather in this diverse assembly, united in our shared commitment to building a more harmonious and compassionate world. May our time together be fruitful and meaningful, leading to actions that promote peace, understanding, and justice for all. In your name, known by various sacred names across faith traditions, we offer this prayer, trusting in your divine guidance and grace. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now take your seats. To officially begin our event and set the stage for today's discussions, please direct your attention to the screen for a brief testimonial video.
In June, when the Philippine Navy tried to resupply those troops, the Chinese blocked the delivery. It was near hand-to-hand combat.
They stole our equipment, they destroyed our equipment, they hurt our personnel. And these are the doings of pirates. I warned our personnel, if this happens again, you have the right to defend yourself.
The Philippines, an archipelago of over 7,600 islands, is a nation shaped by the vast waters that embrace and connect its shores. At the heart of this connection lies the West Philippine Sea, a vital stretch of ocean that not only binds our islands but also strengthens our sense of national unity, serving as both a lifeline and a symbol of shared identity.
Kailangan po ng mga future generations ng Pilipino ang mga resources dito sa West Philippine Sea. Pag-asa po ng Pilipinas ang West Philippine Sea, kaya hindi natin pwede talikuran.
Our waters are the lifeblood of future generations and are deeply personal to our nation. The livelihoods of our fishermen, the heartbeat of our coastal communities, and the cornerstone of our nation's economic stability that mostly depend on the West Philippine Sea. Recognizing this, the Philippine government has made significant efforts to safeguard not only our sovereignty, but also the livelihood tied to our seas. This unyielding stance is a testament to our nation's commitment to protect its people and its lands. Our defense capabilities are being continuously strengthened to face growing challenges. Through cooperative activities with like-minded nations, we are reinforcing alliances that not only bolster our national defense, but also contribute to mutual security and peace. The government's approach brings together all sectors to make the most of our national strengths. This united effort ensures that our collective will is stronger than any external threat. Local government units across the country play a key role in supporting the armed forces of the Philippines in this campaign. Whether through military readiness or diplomatic efforts, the Philippines remains focused on maintaining peace while standing firm in its commitment to protect its sovereignty.
The Filipino Navy SEAL lost his right thumb after the Chinese rammed his boat.
Katapos ng June 17 na insidente, sir, sa ginawa ng China o Chinese, mas lalong nagliyab pagnanasa ng sundalo na pagsilbihan yung bayan. Yung gusto ng damdamin ko na silbihan yung bayan, sir, nandun pa rin, lalong lumiliyab. Sir, gusto ko na rin bumalik sa servisyo sa parang kapagsilbihan. Para sa kapwa ko sundalo ng Armed Forces of the Philippines, pagpatuloy lang natin ang ating laban ng may tapang at lakas para sa ating mamamayang Pilipino at para sa susunod na henerasyon.
To every Filipino, we will not bow down to intimidation, and we will not be silent in the face of adversity. Our waters, our islands, and our heritage are non-negotiable. Let this be a call to action for all of us, to stand united, unafraid of any threat, and to fight for what is rightfully ours. We are the protectors of our future, the stewards of our seas, and together we will ensure that the West Philippine Sea remains a symbol of Filipino resilience and pride. In celebration of Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, MANAMO, we come together as one nation to honor and recognize the Philippines' rich maritime heritage.
So once again, good day to all our participants joining us here on site and those tuning in online. Welcome to the inaugural Balangay Forum, Safeguarding Philippine Maritime Interests, and a happy Maritime Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month to everybody. To officially start our program, I would like to call on stage Vice Admiral 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗏 Chairman of the Foundation for National Interest, to deliver today's opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice Admiral 𝗂𝗂𝗏.
Distinguished guests, our esteemed speakers and panelists, fellow Filipinos of a maritime nation, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful maritime archipelagic morning to everyone. On behalf of the Department of National Defense, the Presidential Office on Maritime Concerns, Australian Aid, the Foundation for National Interest, and Project Waypoints. Welcome to this culminating event of the national month-long celebration of the Philippines as a maritime and archipelagic nation, marked with today's inaugural Balangay Forum entitled Safeguarding Philippine Maritime Interests. Ever since gaining its independence as a state, the Philippines has always seen itself as a maritime and archipelagic nation. This is no less cited in Section 2, Article 12 of the Philippine Constitution, where the state shall protect the nation's maritime domain and preserve its use and benefit for its people. However, there has been a disconnect with what we are, the policies that we have formulated, and the actual focus of governance, resource allocation, and implementation. The Philippines, as a good member of the global community, conforms and abides to international norms and customs, and is actively participating in the formulation of international laws and treaties, foremost of which is the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea, or the fundamental law in the governance of the world's oceans, where the Philippine delegation, together with other archipelagic and coastal nations, invested and worked for the inclusion of the archipelagic doctrine. With the finalization of the Third United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982, the Philippines was one of the very first countries to sign the treaty, and further, to ratify it in 1984. As UNCLOS was coming into force in 1994, 10 years later, the Philippines came up with a national marine policy to capitalize on what can be gained for the Philippines, taking into account its archipelagic nature. Despite being blessed with an abundance of natural resources, being in the apex of the Coral Triangle, having a vast reserve of untapped marine energy and mineral resources, possessing a vibrant maritime industry, and endowed with a seagoing nation providing for more than 1/4 of the world's merchant seafarers. And despite the policies, plans, programs, and activities to harness such potentials, much is still to be desired of what the Philippines can be and what it can do for its people. For historically, policy making in the Philippines was dominated by local issues with a land-based perspective, prioritizing land-based planning and management in social and economic activities. prior to the Maritime Archipelagic Nations Awareness Month, or MANAMO. Though not having a lack of well-thought-out marine and maritime policies and action plans by our various governing agencies, which were sufficient to achieve the goals that these agencies set individually. Collectively, however, such policies were disjointed and uncoordinated, falling short of what could have been done if this were done in synergy and synchronized. MANAMO aims to increase awareness and appreciation for the Philippines' maritime and archipelagic nature, with the end goal of calling for a whole-of-nation approach in addressing maritime and archipelagic concerns, and for the Philippines to use its strength as an archipelagic state. As we celebrate MANAMO's 7th annual commemoration, today's inaugural Balangay Forum anchors on bringing together maritime security specialists, practitioners, and other stakeholders to address challenges in the developing complex geopolitical conditions, where the current rules-based order that has brought relatively global peace and stability resulting to economic growth is being threatened by disruptive and aggressive forces. The aim of the forum is to have an open discussion to help the government and the people as one entity to strengthen the structures and processes that support the civil's maritime security and contribute to the enhancement of its governance by way of introducing changes that have undergone comprehensive stakeholder consultation. Further, the forum will highlight relevant matters such as pertinent international and national maritime legislation, the role of relevant maritime agencies in securing Philippine waters, and how the academia, civil society, and the private sector can contribute to raising awareness about the importance of a whole-of-nation approach to maritime governance. This will be done by navigating through 3 panel discussions with the following themes: protecting the Philippines' maritime domain, the role of science and technology in maritime security, and harnessing the blue economy. In this voyage of celebrating MANAMO, our final destination is to instill in each and every Filipino that we as a nation are bound to our seas and to continue to advocate for effective and efficient maritime governance practices in order to sustainably harness and maximize its rich marine environment and biodiversity while securing its people and waters, not just for the month of September, but for every day in our lives. Once again, welcome to the inaugural Balangay Forum, and let us all look forward to a vibrant and worthwhile interaction. In an additional role, I have the honor and sincere pleasure of introducing the keynote speaker. For I have witnessed him in action while I was still active in service. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you our keynote speaker, the Honorable 𝗬𝗪𝗪 C. Teodoro Jr., Secretary of National Defense.
Please take your seats, everyone. My sincere thanks to a comrade in arms of long-standing Vice Admiral Jose Luis Alano. As he stated earlier, we served together in my first stint in this position. And I'm glad that he became the flag officer in command of the Philippine Navy and the first, I think, head of the NTF-WPS. And today, he continues his advocacy as the chairman of the Foundation for National Interest, showing dedication to a cause that we have to continue to carry for the benefit of future Filipinos and citizens of the world at that. Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, my colleague, the Honorable Andres C. Centino, our Secretary, Presidential Assistant for Maritime Concerns, Dr. 𝗜𝗂𝗿𝗂𝗿𝗆, representing Ambassador HKU, who is now inaugurating an Australian firm in Clark with the President. The Deputy Head of Mission of Australia to the Philippines, our Senior Undersecretary Ireneo C. Espino and other DND senior officials, our Chief of Staff, General Romeo Saturnino Bronner Jr., and the rest of the AFP hierarchy present, Admiral Ronnie Hilgavan of the Philippine Coast Guard, our Commandant, and the rest of the Coast Guard family here today. Colleagues in government, our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. What a fitting end to the month of September that we are all gathered here to the culmination of the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month. Firstly, I'd like to thank the sponsors of this forum and those who participated in making this month a relevant one. I'd like to pay tribute, of course, and thanks to the Australian government, to the Foundation for National Interest, and to all those who have made the awareness and enforcement of international norms for the benefit not only of the Filipino people, but for the benefit of the perpetuation of norms of international law, their life's work. May I suggest, though, to Secretary Centino that he recommend to the President, because I think MANAMo is a good thing. We have to preserve and evolve its heritage. So let's put a timeline on MANAMO. I think we should all devote ourselves to raising awareness amongst our people of the stakes involved if we do not actively develop and protect our maritime resources, and the foundation of which are our international law entitlements. Awareness of our people now is very high, but contained in a specific area of our maritime domain where there is friction with China. That's the West Philippine Sea. But that is only a small portion of our maritime domain. And it will need a lot of convergence between the private sector, our government, and our international partners to protect the other areas in a sustainable and legal way for the benefit of our future generations. So I propose that the executive order instituting September as Maritime Awareness Month, let's place a timeline that we go on awareness, extensive awareness with facts and with institutional legal knowledge, partnering with our educational institutions, our public service agencies, our civil society partners, in order to promote awareness. However, let's stop after 5 years or 6 years. We must convert awareness into action. Why? We have in our circle some understanding of where we need to go, depending on our disciplines. However, what is lacking is collective political will to pursue a path towards securing these maritime assets, given the fact that those that feel the need in the body politic are those that live in coastal areas. And a lot of Filipinos still live in landlocked areas. However, what we should do, because the political leadership will is already there, no less than the President has already said time and time again that we will not waver, we will protect our maritime interests in accordance with international law, which is why in our department and the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we came up with the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. Cascading that will into collective national action to cross party lines, in which each and every citizen will look forward to the fact that he or she can rely on the bounty of the boundaries set by UNCLOS for our people as a source of sustenance for a sustainable future. So my challenge to the leadership of the conference is how to evolve awareness, how to disperse awareness, how to make the synergies necessary and the connectivities necessary between the strong political will of the leadership and the convergence from the electorate, so that we will have more collective desire for strengthening our capabilities, strengthening our institutions in the end, with the end in view of institutionalizing in the psyche of each and every future generation Filipino that this is her or his responsibility. This is what, when she or he comes into a position to help, they should, and which they should devote some part of their lives to. Now, I also noticed the theme, safeguarding Philippine maritime interests. This should also evolve because as a conference, as a forum, our interests are not only Philippine interests, because our interests are based on the same set of legal principles that other nations follow. So in that sense, we converge. Sometimes there may be points of friction and conflict. But with those other countries who are present here, we all agree that we should settle disputes in accordance with UNCLOS and not to recreate a narrative of what international law is and use deceptive language, engage in spurious conduct, sub rosa conduct in order to subvert countries which stand up to them. That is unacceptable, and that is why perhaps all of us are here, because we agree that where we do not agree, we agree to settle it in a fair, transparent, and open manner under an agreed framework of law and procedures. That is clear. We do not try to avoid settling disputes by saying discussions and consultations. That is the most useless phrase I have ever heard in my life in dispute settlement. Discussions and consultations, not negotiations. Notice the smart distinction between negotiations or arbitration, for that matter, and discussions and consultations. Also, an important facet for the Filipino people. We know fiscal constraints abound and ossify sometimes what we need to do. However, we should never trade short-term inflows of cash inflows, for a long-term benefit in the future. Likewise, in the same way, we should also make a call to action to our local officials and other people not to be tempted by spurious offers of cash or other assistance in order for international criminal syndicates and their ilk to have a foothold in this country. Because it is the easiest way to destroy the moral fabric, economic fabric, and social fabric of this country. For the scholars here, look what happened with the steel industry and why there are disincentives for Filipinos and legitimate business operations to invest in a steel industry. I'm giving you a tip. It's up to you to research. Lastly, I hope that this forum is also a venue for not only the maritime interests per se as a point of defining which is what and to whom these things belong, but to defining how we can help each other in cases of dangers posed by the maritime domain. Tsunamis, typhoons, disasters or collisions at sea, and the like. I think this is a very, very important forum. The Coast Guard is here for discussing ways and means of how states should be given free right to cooperate when it involves saving lives without any inference or any presumption of abandonment of one's rights or sovereign jurisdiction. I believe this is an important thematic that should be discussed today. And lastly, I congratulate once again each and everybody for participating in this Monday morning. We encourage more interactions. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the members of the Diplomatic Corps who are here. This month also, we will be hosting the largest conference for this year, which is the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which will be participated in by no less than, I believe, 70 countries. And we look forward because there is a close relationship between what we're talking about today and our position in the Ring of Fire as the most vulnerable country in the world. It will be a good forum also to attend, and we encourage, Secretary Loyzaga and I encourage each and everyone's participation in the same. So have a good forum. A pleasant good morning to each and every one of you.
Thank you most kindly, Secretary Teodoro and Vice Admiral Alano. At this point, may I ask that we take 5 minutes to conduct the photo opportunity. Thank you. May I request all the VIPs in Table 1, together with Vice Admiral Alano and S&D, to have a photo opportunity in front of the stage, please. Speak. And then the diplomatic or
the members of the ambassadors present.
so and then
Lahat na ng ambassadors. Representatives of embassy. Lahat na sila, lahat na ng members ng
may we also request the members of the diplomatic corps for a picture with the Secretary of National Defense, Vice Admiral Alano, and the sponsors. May we ask Vice Admiral Alano, Secretary Teodoro, and Dr. 𝗬𝗂𝗿𝗆 with the audience. With the students first, sorry, then audience. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, good morning. Today, we are privileged to be joined by distinguished speakers from various sectors who will underscore the importance of good maritime governance. They will explore strategies, policies, and instruments that the Philippines can adopt to sustainably manage its rich marine resources and biodiversity while safeguarding the nation's security. These discussions also aim to highlight the importance of a whole-of-nation approach and substantive partnerships in achieving these critical objectives. To kick off our panel discussion, it is my pleasure to invite to the stage our moderator, Professor 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗏 from the International Studies Department of De La Salle University. Professor 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏 will introduce our distinguished panelists and guide us through this morning's discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗏.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be in front of you today and to be moderating this very distinguished panel. Before we begin the first panel, allow me to briefly introduce our members. Firstly, I would like to call to the stage General Romeo Browner, Jr. General Browner is a distinguished member of the Philippine Military Academy Makatao class of 1989. He graduated as salutatorian and served as the regimental commander baron of the Cadet Corps. On July 21, 2023, he assumed command as Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, following his tenure as the 65th Commanding General of the Philippine Army, which began on December 10, 2021. General Browner holds 3 advanced degrees, a master's in information management from the Ateneo de Manila Graduate School of Business, an MBA from both the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand and the European School of Management in Oxford. He also has a master's in strategic studies from the United States Army War College. In March 2023, he was inducted into the USAWC International Fellows Hall of Fame. In recognition of his service, General Browner received the honorary award of the Malaysian Armed Forces Order for Valor, Gallant Commander First Degree in 2022, and in 2023, the Legion of Merit from the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General Browner. The next panelist I'd like to call is Admiral 𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏. Sir, please join us on stage. Thank you. Admiral 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 is a distinguished graduate of the Philippine Military Academy 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 class of 1993. He holds multiple advanced degrees as well. Among these is a Master of Maritime Studies by research from the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security at the University of Wollongong in Australia, where he focused on Philippine maritime border security and the law of the sea. He also pursued studies in national security at the National Defense College of the Philippines and leadership and governance at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Admiral 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's leadership has been shaped by his extensive experience commanding various Coast Guard districts, major units of the Philippine Coast Guard, and serving as commanding officer of PCG capital ships and 𝗜𝗵𝗏 vessels. He also spearheaded the PCG Task Force 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 perils of the sea, aboard PCG vessels to promote peace and a rules-based order at sea. In recognition of his achievements and contributions to the nation, Admiral 𝗲𝗂𝗂 has received numerous awards, including the Distinguished Service Medal, the Philippine Military Academy Cavalier Award for Coast Guard operations in 2020, and the PMA Outstanding Achievement Award for his appointment as PCG Commandant. A warm welcome to Admiral 𝗲𝗂𝗂𝗏. The next panelist that I would like to introduce is Dr. 𝗦𝗳𝗂𝗏𝗄𝗏. Dr. 𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏 is a senior career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and was most recently Assistant Secretary of the Southeast Asia Maritime Branch. Dr. 𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏 has held a number of senior roles at DFAT and the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, including Head of the Southeast Asia Vaccines Access Task Force and Assistant Secretary of the Middle East Branch. She has previously served overseas in the Australian Embassy to Thailand. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. 𝗦𝗳𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏. And last but not least, allow me to introduce Attorney 𝗜𝗏 𝗂𝗃𝗏. Attorney 𝗜𝗏, please join us on stage, ma'am, is a senior state counsel at the Department of Justice and the head of the DOJ's Legal Staff Maritime Group. She is also the DOJ's permanent representative to the working groups of the National Task Force of the West Philippine Sea and the DOJ's alternative representative to the Technical Working Group of the National Maritime Council. She's a graduate of the Ateneo School of Law with semestral honors and holds a Master of Laws degree with distinction from the IMO International Maritime Law Institute in Malta. Her work experience in the field of maritime law and the law of the sea spans for more than 15 years now, which includes being a member of the Philippine legal team that studied the filing of the arbitration case against China in 2012. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Attorney 𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I have a couple of questions that I'm really excited to ask our distinguished panelists, and we will also get the chance to get questions from the audience. But perhaps to start the ball rolling, I'd like to ask each of our panelists your thoughts about how the South China Sea factors into the strategic policies of the broader Indo-Pacific region. As we are all aware, there seems to be in international relations a turn to the Indo-Pacific. How much of that turn of the world factors in the South China Sea, and what implications does this hold for the Philippines? Perhaps General Browner, maybe we can start with you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, of course, we know that recently there has been a shift in interest from the European theater, from the other theaters in the world to the Indo-Pacific region. And this is because of the recent events that have happened, which actually have a direct and indirect effect on other nations around the world. Economically, we all know that most of about 60% of economic trade passes through the South China Sea. And naturally, the other nations, and in particular, we have seen a lot of interest from European countries because of that factor that affects their shores as well. So it's really very important that we pay particular attention to the region, not just economically, but also in terms of its security.
So, sir, it seems like there's a nexus between geopolitics and geoeconomics, as you mentioned, and these dynamics seem to attract a lot of attention on the Indo-Pacific. If I can move to Admiral Gavan, sir, maybe because of all these developments in geopolitics and geoeconomics, what implications do you think will this hold for the Philippines?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to start by reckoning to the statement of the Secretary of National Defense that the world exists following a legal framework. The South China Sea exists now as a theater where international law, its application, its interpretation as an application have been significantly altered. If it is altered, then the rest will follow. Its impact, its implications will be far-reaching from diplomatic to informational. So that is the most significant impact, I think, of South China Sea to the rest of us, not only to the Philippines, but to the whole law-abiding world. So if we are to address it, we have to do everything we can to encourage countries to go back to the rule of law.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a very important factor in terms of how the rules-based order seems to be challenged by different actors in the international arena. If I can move to Dr. Collette, I wonder what was the thinking in Canberra about the developments happening in the South China Sea, and what was the trigger for Australia to play an even more active role in this part of the world?
Thank you. Yes, as General Browner and Admiral Gavan have said, I think there are really two key reasons why the South China Sea is an issue for the rest of the world, not just for the Philippines and China. The first is that the South China Sea is a vital waterway for the entire international community. Our ships trade here and they conduct other lawful maritime operations or activities in the South China Sea, and they should be able to do that without fear of confrontation or coercion. The second factor, as Admiral Gavan has said, is that an attack on the South China Sea rules and norms is an attack on the rules-based order writ large. For Australia, we have a vision for the region where it is governed by rules and international law, not by force or raw power, not where one country dominates and other countries are dominated. We want all countries to have an equal say in what happens in our region. If that's under threat, then that's a threat to Australia as well. And so we're really pleased to have a strategic partnership with the Philippines, because Australia and the Philippines share a vision for the region, which is stable, peaceful, and prosperous. And we share a commitment to standing up for international law to ensure that that vision can be realized.
Thank you, Dr. Colette. The factors of the vital waterway and being a challenge to the rules-based international order, I think this is something that all of us are seeing in different facets and different aspects of maritime security. And now if I can turn to Attorney Ganchun, because you were involved in the filing of the arbitration case against China. What implications do you think, since the award has been heavily in favor of the Philippines, but we've not been able to leverage that, and China seems to have a different interpretation of international law, what can the Philippines do more of in this regard? We have the law on our side, but what else can we do to advance our national interest?
Thank you, Professor Charmaine. And just to add, first, I agree with all of the statements of my co-panelists, of course, that the South China Sea is very important because it is a strategic waterway that connects the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So in the Indo-Pacific strategy, it plays a very important role. And of course, 1/3 of the global trade passes through the South China Sea in billions of dollars. So it plays a very important role. And so the Philippines filed this arbitration case last 2013 because of a very big uncertainty, I would say, on the part of the Philippines, because we need a declaration from an international tribunal that that vast area on the western side of the archipelago is our exclusive economic zone and continental shelf without any overlapping EECs and continental shelves from other states. And we did get a legal victory. It was a resounding legal victory, a unanimous decision by a panel of 5 well-respected juries, internationally respected experts in the law of the sea. And so we got a declaration that that area is our exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, meaning those waters are international waters where the freedom of navigation and overflight applies, in addition to the high seas, of course, in the middle of the South China Sea. So this is a big contribution, I would say, to the international community, because then you got a very clear ruling that vessels of all states can pass through the South China Sea in the exercise of the freedom of navigation and overflight. And we're using already the arbitral award. I mean, it's 8 years, but the first few years very rocky. But we're already using it, and we got the support. The Department of Foreign Affairs is not here, but we're very thankful for our international partners, including Australia, of course, among the first who expressed their support for the arbitral award. And I believe that through the passage of time, because especially last May 2024, the arbitral award was cited several times in the advisory opinion issued by the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So I believe through the passage of time, the arbitral award would become legally entrenched in jurisprudence. And so we would get a more secure legal position that would support the activities of all vessels there in the South China Sea, not just of the Philippines, but the vessels of all other states, because those waters are international waters. And of course, there's the high seas in the middle.
Attorney Ganchun, you mentioned the critical factor of partnerships. And I think this is where I'd like to shift our conversation to. The second theme of our discussion highlights diplomatic and defense partnerships of the Philippines. So if I can go back to General Browner, how do you think the Philippines can enhance its defense partnerships with like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific and in the world to better secure our maritime interests?
Yes. So aside from the fact that we already have defense attachés posted in various countries, we are now also expanding that to include other countries where we initially didn't have any attachés posted there. So we are increasing our presence in the world by posting defense attachés in like-minded nations. But aside from that, we have been also part of several fora where we discuss among like-minded nations defense issues, security issues, such as the issue of the security of South China Sea, specifically for us, the West Philippine Sea. Just recently, I came from the Asia-Pacific Chiefs of Defense Conference in Hawaii, where there were 28 of us nations, chiefs of defense of 28 nations, including China and NATO. And among the security issues that we discussed were security issues on the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. It was important that we got together, discuss these issues, and one very vital result of this is, of course, the agreement that all countries should respect a rules-based international order. So aside from just these discussions, we also are into specific kinetic actions. So it's not just discussions that we're doing, not just consultations that we're doing with other countries, but we are actually doing specific actions in the West Philippine Sea. And just 2 days ago, we had our multilateral maritime cooperative activity where 5 nations participated in. We had the United States, Australia, New Zealand for the first time, Japan, and of course the Philippines. So these specific activities show a concrete action towards that collaboration that we have in order for us to promote a rules-based international order, in order for us to ensure that the Indo-Pacific is free and open.
Thank you, sir. I think increasing our presence and holding a lot of these joint activities or joint synergies would be very beneficial for the Philippines. If I could turn to Admiral Gavan, sir, along the same line, sir, how do you think the Philippines can leverage the really vital defense partnerships that we already have so that we can further advance our maritime interests?
Yes, foremost, I think we have to secure our moral high ground by keeping our country an adherent to rules-based order. We can further help shape the region to the way the world should exist. And for this, the Coast Guard actually is not only a bystander in global politics, or in regional politics at least. We are shaping the formation of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. Through that forum, we are wishing to develop the common protocol on engagements at sea for Coast Guards and maritime law enforcement agencies, with the hope that with us, being the oldest Coast Guard in this part of the world, we can inspire other Coast Guard to go back to the basic, go back to UNCLOS, go back to the International Maritime Conventions, which really govern the existence of Coast Guard. So we can be doing things the way things should be done in accordance with law, and perhaps influence other parties to behave the way they must behave in our common background. That's one. Second, we are also pursuing bilateral arrangements with like-minded states or our friends. We have, and even our ally, we have the Aeronautical and Maritime Search and Rescue Agreement with the US, which allows us to, broadly govern our different areas in the country. We also have one with Vietnam. We have one with Indonesia. We are actually reaching out to as far as Europe. We are working out one with Norway to build on their very rich maritime heritage, to help us develop better aware maritime people to sustain the Coast Guard role in this part of the world. We are also pursuing one with UK. We have one with India. Almost all stakeholders which consider South China Sea as vital to their survival in this world order. So they can also be made aware that the security of the South China Sea is not a responsibility of the Philippines alone. This is the responsibility of all, because the world has become so entwined and the oceans and seas have in fact ascended to a status as bridges linking these globalized economies. And to further sustain this, our international cooperation with Australia, with the US and Japan has enabled the Coast Guard to develop this manpower, banking on our, well, I think we are now one of the youngest service in the country, banking on the strength of the millennials, which now run the Coast Guard. These three countries and a few others are helping us develop a kind of mindset which is rules-based. You know, in the Coast Guard, we are also affected by what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. But we know that our greatest strength is on the knowledge and the norms and the mindset that we will develop amongst our people. We don't want to be a bystander in international cooperation engagement. We want the Coast Guard to position itself as one of those who inspire how Coast Guards and maritime law enforcers should behave in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That focus on human resources, I think, is something that oftentimes flies under the radar, but that's investments in our people are very, very important. I also note that you mentioned the Philippines reaching out with other countries in Southeast Asia and as far as Europe, which simply just highlights the fact that all of these are common security issues that we are facing. So thanks for that, sir. Dr. Colette, turning to Australia's defense partnerships, you mentioned that Australia has a vision for the region. I wonder if you can enlighten us on maybe some plans, some areas of cooperation that Australia wants to further entrench or extend with the Philippines.
Absolutely. Australia has been a strong partner of the Philippines for almost 80 years now. So this is not a new partnership. And we have had a really strong defense and military partnership with the Philippines since the Second World War, really strong partnership. In fact, with the Philippines, we have an enhanced defense cooperation program, which is our largest in the region. That's how significant there is. And it involves a huge program of training, exercises, and other kinds of activities between our militaries, which are really important. So for example, we engage in exercises together. We're part of exercise Balangay, as many would know. And also we have our own bilateral amphibious exercise, Alon, which has been very successful. And in addition to exercises, the maritime cooperative activities that you mentioned have been really important recently, both bilaterally and multilaterally with Japan, the United States, and others. But beyond the defense partnership, because it's not just about defense, it's about a whole of government and whole of nation endeavor here, and including with partners, we also have recently agreed an MOU on enhanced maritime cooperation. And that includes our defense partnership, but it goes beyond that to include a partnership with the Coast Guard, to work together on marine environmental protection, to work together on supporting international law, a whole range of areas. And so we're really seeking to expand this partnership we have with the Philippines. But as my colleagues here have said, it's not just about our bilateral work. I'm really pleased to see here today that we have a number of partners from the diplomatic community, because we would really like to extend that on a more regular basis to be multilateral, multi-partner endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting once again the importance of relationships, partnerships on different levels. And speaking of relationships, if I can turn to Attorney Ganchun, what are your thoughts on going back to what Admiral Gavan said earlier about human resources, investing on our people? How important do you think would be track 1.5 or track 2 engagement, specifically on knowledge and knowledge on international law and education about international law?
Yes, very important. My view is, and I think this is mentioned already a lot of times, the way to properly manage really the West Philippine Sea is to take this whole of nation, whole of government approach, including using all instruments of national power. So with respect to whole of nation approach, because whole of government means you need all concerned agencies of the government to properly cooperate with one another through existing interagency mechanisms. So the key to having a coherent management of the West Philippines is for all agencies to work together under the whole of government approach. But under the whole of nation approach, we need we need our citizens, we need the private sectors, we need the civil society organizations to be vigilant, especially in the face of foreign malign influence, which employs disinformation and propaganda against the Philippines, especially with respect to our legal rights in the West Philippine Sea and against the 2016 Arbitral Award. So, talking about spreading the correct information, let the scientists talk, let the professors talk, and put it in the textbooks of the children. All right, so they would know, they would not be easily swayed by this disinformation and by this propaganda. So it's very important, this whole of nation approach. And I just would like to mention, because I noted that I read in the news, I think last month or 2 months ago, that there is a significant increase in the number of applications to the armed forces of the Philippines amid surveys that a lot of Filipinos, majority of Filipinos, want to defend, are ready to defend the country against foreign intrusion. So they're very well informed of what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. So I hope we can continue to do that. And at the same time, also continue this track 2 and track 1, so we can continue the conversation with respect to the issues in the West Philippine Sea so that everybody would be properly informed.
Thank you, Attorney Ganchun, for mentioning information operations, and this is really something that's embedded so deeply in Philippine society, and we have to have ways to counter those kinds of operations. I have one more question to raise to our panelists before I open the floor for questions from our audience. This time, this question references deterrence and the response of the Philippines regarding threats in the maritime domain. So, General Browner, in what ways do you think the Philippine government can enhance its deterrence capacity and also to respond to threats in the maritime domain?
All right. So, for the armed forces of the Philippines, we have a 3-pronged strategy when dealing with the West Philippine Sea. First is that we have to maintain our physical presence or effective presence. And the only way to do that is to be there physically. That is why we are maintaining our military post in the 2nd Thomas Shoal or Ayungin Shoal, particularly on the BRP Sierra Madre. So we are not going to abandon that because we need to establish our physical presence. Our second strategy is to develop an effective or credible deterrence. And the way that we are going to do this is by modernizing our armed forces of the Philippines. So it's very important that we have a modernized armed forces that is world-class. Right now, I can say that our armed forces of the Philippines is already world-class. We have the best human resource the best soldiers, we believe. This has been proven in many instances when our soldiers, our pilots, our sailors, our soldiers went abroad to participate in joint exercises where they excelled in those exercises. What is lacking, however, are the platforms. We already have modern platforms, but we still need more of this. That is why we are, of course, appealing to our Congress to help us fund our modernization program. But at the same time, our Secretary of National Defense is already looking for other means by which we could fund our modernization program. Our modernization program is actually very ambitious, but we have to be ambitious in order to be able to create that deterrent effect, that credible deterrent. And then finally, our third strategy is, of course, as mentioned a while ago, establishing strong relations with our treaty ally, the United States, and with our other partners, partner nations, and like-minded nations. In fact, it's very important also that we formalize these relationships, just like what we have with the United States through the MDT, the Visiting Forces Agreement, with Australia, with our SOFA, with Japan, for instance, with our Reciprocal Access Agreement, and the various memorandum of agreement or understanding with other nations such as Singapore, India, and other nations.
Thank you, sir. Admiral Gavan, if you have any thoughts on how the Philippine government can enhance its deterrence capability.
Thank you. For the Philippine Coast Guard, I think the best way to deter is to remove the intent. Well, as one of the key players in the security of this country, the Coast Guard believes that it cannot exist alone. So since 2011, actually, we have pursued this strategic thought, or strategic concept, which we call the One Nation Engagement at Sea, or One at Sea, where we intend to leverage the whole arms of government and the rule of law. The rule of law being the great leveler among states, big or small. In pursuing this strategic concept, we have 3 lines of effort. Number 1 is maritime domain awareness and response, including law enforcement. So we need as many white hulls as much as we can to project the rule of law. We don't want the Coast Guard to become, well, a navy cloaked in white. We want our white to be pure as much as possible, to ensure that the world knows that we are doing things with purity, that we are really observing the rule of law, no pretensions, no deception. It is just plain and simple enforcement of what the law says. Along with this, also in the first line of effort, we are pursuing the transparency initiative, where we inform the whole world, not only the local or domestic audience, as to what are happening on the ground in the course of law enforcement and other activities that we do. We also recognize in this number 1 line of effort that we are following a spectrum of conflict from peacetime to wartime. And the Coast Guard is tasked to perform the peacetime role up to crisis, and even as we approach wartime, if the policy of the state is to de-escalate. We're conscious about that. And the second line of effort is coastal state administration. It is the reason why we have been recruiting as many Coast Guardians as much as we can, so we can populate the whole coastal communities of the country with Coast Guard stations and substations, so we can enforce, so we can implement domestic laws and applicable international laws. It is through that we believe we can fulfill not only our rights, but our obligations under international law. It is always, partner. You have rights, you also have obligations to fulfill. And number three, we'd like to leverage the international community of nations. That's why we are pursuing as a third line of effort, international cooperation and engagement. We'd like to leverage the weight of the like-minded states to be with us. We cannot go as symmetrical with them. But if the rule of law is with us, through our different and deepening engagement with our foreign partners and allies, I think we can provide that counterweight to deter those who doesn't want to follow the law. Again, I think our greatest leveler is the rule of law. We have to go back to UNCLOS. We have to go back to the arbitral award. We have to go back to international maritime conventions to which these countries are party, to educate all that actually we can already find peace and deter, these dysfunctions in our relationship with others if we just go back to the law. Because the law, after all, are already product of compromises among interested parties. So the Secretary of National Defense is perfectly right. There must be a legal framework to which all states, including us, should work within. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I turn to Dr. Colette, if I could just mention to the audience that there are pieces of paper on your table. If you have any questions, please write your questions down and pass them over to members of the team, and they will then forward those questions to us to be answered by the panelists in a little bit. Dr. Colette, talking about deterrence and response to threats in the maritime domain, I know that Australia is doing a lot of things, not just focused specifically on defense, but also on investing in civil maritime security. What specific areas under the civil maritime security domain should the Philippines and Australia be more active on to achieve common objectives?
Sure. Thank you very much for mentioning that. Of course, we're really pleased to see the Philippine government investing itself in modernization of the AFP and the PCG. But as you say, we also have a big investment in the civil maritime security domain. In fact, we've had a program worth 328 million pesos, which we have been implementing over the past 5 years or so. And I'm pleased to say that we are set to double that amount of money over the next 5 years. So we're definitely committed to continuing to support the Philippines in this regard. And to date and ongoing, we have been supporting everything from law of the sea training for the Coast Guard to supporting interagency cooperation, given how crucial that is to success in this area. We have provided equipment to the PCG as well. And we have also been focusing on some of those challenges to the marine environment that are not traditional security threats, but actually come from climate change, pollution, overfishing, etc., which can also have a huge impact on the marine environment and maritime security. Excuse me. And so part of what we have been looking at is areas like coral reef restoration, reducing marine plastics, IUU fishing. And so we are really looking forward to working closely with the Philippines on plans to protect the marine environment and to ensure we can protect resources in the Philippine maritime domain. That's something that we've been talking about, and we're looking forward to working closely with the Philippines on.
Thank you, Dr. Colette, for telling us that there are really a lot of areas of cooperation beyond the military, as important as the military aspect of the maritime security domain is. Turning to Attorney Ganchun on advocating international law. It's been highlighted time and again in our discussion this morning that international law is something that is on our side and that we should continue to leverage because we cannot afford any challenge to the rules-based international order. So in that sense, what else can we do to ensure that everybody knows and is aware of international law and what it means for ordinary Filipinos?
Oh, so this would go into the informational aspect of the use of instruments of national power. Again, you need to propagate awareness among the people. We started that already. I mean, under this administration, a lot of workshops have been conducted already, including the informational drive under the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea. So, and I think it has very good results so far. So it can continue this information drive. But let me just also add on to what Admiral 𝗬𝗂𝗏 said, because he's been talking about the rule of law, etc. So I'm in the legal field. So I just would like to say that the strength of the Philippines really is the fact that it is observing UNCLOS, it is compliant with UNCLOS, which cannot be said of the other party in the maritime dispute in the West Philippine Sea. And the Philippines is very conscious that its actions are in accordance with UNCLOS. And UNCLOS, of course, is a legal instrument that can also serve as a deterrence if you properly enforce it. It's a legal instrument that has been negotiated by the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea for 9 years. It's a comprehensive maritime legal order and framework that was agreed on based on consensus, and China was, of course, part of that negotiation. And so any attempt really to change this comprehensive maritime legal order is not good to the international community. So we are also very vigilant against any any attempt to create regional exceptions to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, etc. Because so long as we keep to UNCLOS, we are safe. We are protected under the shield of UNCLOS. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Professor,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
may I ask a question to attorney? Are we allowed to do that? Okay, so we already have the 2016 arbitral ruling, but what lacks is the implementing mechanism in order for us to be able to implement that ruling. What actions or what else can we do in order for us to be able to implement that ruling with the absence of course, an implementing mechanism or a superpower or a super body that would overlook that implementation?
Thanks, CSAP. Actually, that's a usual question in West Philippine Sea forums about the enforcement and the implementation of the arbitral award. And I would always explain that the way to understand this question is to think that our understanding of the national legal system is different from the international legal system. Because in the national legal system, if there's a decision by a court, we know who would enforce it. The police would enforce it, the sheriff would enforce it. But that's not the same in the international legal system, because in the international legal system, there are no courts with compulsory jurisdiction. The only time that the ICJ, for example, or other international courts can exercise jurisdiction is with the consent of the disputing states. And once that decision is issued by the international tribunal, it is expected, since both states give their consent to the exercise of jurisdiction, that the other party who lost would comply in good faith with the obligations based on as explained in that decision. And in the arbitral award, we know that there was already advanced consent on the part of China just by being a party to UNCLOS. It has already given its advanced consent to compulsory arbitration. So it can be expected that China should comply with its legally binding arbitral award. Now, let's go to enforcement. So it's legally binding, we know that, even if China did not participate in the arbitration proceedings. Now, let's go to enforcement. There's no body, an international body, that can really enforce international judicial decisions. There's an attempt to make the UN Security Council in Article 94 of the UN Charter gave it the power to enforce decisions of the International Court of Justice. But of course, we know the veto powers of the 5 permanent members, the UN Security Council. And so therefore, there's really no international body higher than states that can enforce international decisions. And that is because the explanation for that is the members of the international community are all states who are sovereign equals. There's no sovereign higher than states. All of them are sovereign equals. And so therefore, for the international community to work, everybody depends on the good faith of one another to comply with their international obligations, right? So the problem is, if there's another state, a sovereign equal, who does not comply with its international obligation, what can you do? All right. And so this is where you get the support of other states to uphold the rule of law, right? And I'm happy, of course, that there's an increasing number of states that support the arbitral award, 30 plus, etc. And it's being cited in international rulings. And we are already, actually, CSAF, we are already implementing the award because we got the declaration, we achieved our objective by filing the case. We got our declaration that that is our EEC. So as a sovereign state, because we got that declaration, we implement the declaration. So how do we implement the award? So by exercising our sovereign rights there, we're already implementing the arbitral award. By encouraging our fishermen to fish in the West Philippine Sea, by providing further protection and security, that's already an implementation of the award. By encouraging our marine scientists to conduct marine research there, that's already an implementation of the award. By, for example, resuming oil and gas exploration there, just an example, because that's policy issue, that's already also an implementation of the award. So all of the things, so long as you exercise your sovereign rights there, because you got the declaration already, that's already an implementation of the award because you are a sovereign state. You can, by yourself, implement the award. If you are a small state, you're a middle power in international relations, but of course, still a small state compared to China. You cannot do this by yourself. You need to get the support of the other sovereign states. So that's how you implement and enforce the award in the international sphere.
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am. So we can transform this into a classroom. So I volunteered to do a board work as well. Now, in implementing the arbitral award, to be more concrete about it, the Philippine Coast Guard has actually already aligned its rules on the use of force with not only with UNCLOS, but with the arbitral award. And that explains why sometimes others might find our rules on the use of force to be too kind. But it is what arbitral award says. So we treat EEZ as waters, we treat rocks as rocks. Because we clarified UNCLOS through the arbitral award. So we have to start observing and implementing first the arbitral award before we expect others to follow suit. So that's how the Coast Guard has treated it, because we know there will be no super body who will be implementing it. We are using moral high ground as our tool to implement the arbitral award.
Thank you, sir. So in effect, we should just keep on doing what we're doing and we should not drop the ball. Dr. Colette.
Everyone wants to get in on this one. I just wanted to add to say that I think the way that we enforce decisions like the arbitral award and all of international law is through international cohesion. The point is that international law is about the development of norms. So it can't be enforced through an international police force, unfortunately, but it can be enforced if the international community sticks together. So if one state operates outside of the rules-based order and tries to undermine international law, and each individual state that's a victim of that can't do much about it, but if they have friends and partners who speak up in support of them, then I think that puts a lot of pressure on the party that is seeking to undermine international law.
Thank you. We have a question from the floor, and I will read it. What are our present and future agenda to protect and sustain our maritime interests? I would ask any member of the panel to address this question. Any volunteers? Sige, sir, go ahead.
I think we have one in the Coast Guard, which is yet to be presented to the National Maritime Council, but I have already intimated it to Secretary Centino, so pwede ko na siguro sabihin. The Coast Guard will be embarking on environmental security or environment security as our additional track to sustain our strategic presence over the West Philippine Sea. The Coast Guard is allocated by law with 32 powers and functions, so we'll just pick up which one is appropriate as we evolve and adapt. With the bottom line, achieving that peaceful, stable, and prosperous West Philippine Sea. So that is in our agenda, and that's why I was whispering something to Dr. 𝗬𝗂𝗿𝗆 because Australia and other allied and friendly countries, our partners, will be part of this effort. We will be embarking more on preserving the marine environment because as we all have become so busy dealing with the kinetic activities in the area, the environment has become so degraded that it threatens the survival not only of this present generation, but the future generation. And not only the survival of the Philippines, but the other states whose lives are also anchored to the sea. So we will do our part, of course, with the support of our friends, partners, and allies.
Can I just add to that as well? I think sometimes, there's a lot of talk about the EEZ, but using these acronyms, I think sometimes we lose sight of what that means. The EEZ is the exclusive economic zone. And so I think it's important to remember what this is all actually about. And in effect, the blue economy could be a huge resource for the Philippines. So if you're able to protect your marine environmental resources, that can bring in a huge amount of wealth for the country through aquaculture, through tourism, through offshore, renewable resources, all kinds of things. And so working to protect that is really important, not just for sovereignty and security, but also for the economy.
Thank you. So far we have as our agenda, environmental security, the blue economy. Anything else, sir?
Okay, for the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we have embarked on an extensive information operations. And we call this campaign Mulat. Mulat in Tagalog means you are enlightened. And the way we do this is we try to reach out to our audience, both internal and external. And we actually have that policy of transparency, where we show the world what is actually happening in the West Philippine Sea. Our motto here is our seas, our rights, our future. So we're trying to also spread this throughout our country, trying to create an awareness among fellow Filipinos about what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. And aside from this, we have also, in terms of our maritime cooperative activities, multilateral, these are not just confined to the countries that I mentioned, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada joined us already, Japan, but we are expanding this also to other European countries. In fact, a lot of them have mentioned their intention to come to the Indo-Pacific region in order to do this bilateral or multilateral activities with us. So these are the plans that we have in the near future until next year.
Thank you, sir. Attorney Gunjan?
Yes, because I need to speak, so I have points for this question. Now, before we move on to the next question, because this panel is actually about protecting the Philippines' maritime domain. And the maritime domain of the Philippines is vast. It's not just about the West Philippine Sea. We do have archipelagic waters. We have the Philippine Rise and the Celebes Sea. And so you're thinking about, and that's why, for example, what Dr. Colette said about the blue economy. So I'm thankful that Congress, the Senate already approved on third reading the Blue Economy Bill last August 2024. So soon we'll have a Blue Economy Council in addition to the National Maritime Councils, because the Blue Economy Council will now focus on the proper management of our vast coastal and marine resources. And then we also have oil spills from time to time, especially in our archipelagic waters. Okay, so it's still part of our maritime domain, and we're just waiting, of course, for Congress, the Senate has already approved on third reading the Archipelagic Sea Lanes Bill, and previous to that, the Maritime Zones Bill. So we're looking forward to having it enacted soon, signed by the President soon. And when you think about archipelagic waters, there's a lot of maritime traffic that passes through our archipelagic waters, and from time to time there would be oil spills there. So it's very important that we need to have a national oil contingency plan, because we haven't really fully implemented Article 6 of the Oil Pollution Prevention Response and Cooperation, the OPRC. We are a member state to that. Coast Guard has its own national oil contingency plan, but it's not really a very comprehensive one as envisioned under Article 6 of the OPRC. So I think we need to do that to protect our archipelagic waters against oil spills. And we also need to think about being a part, ratifying the HNS Convention, the Convention on Liability and Compensation for Leakage of Hazardous and Noxious Substances in Our Waters. And in addition, we also need to ratify as soon as possible if the BBNJ Treaty, okay, the agreement under United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, because the water, there are high seas there in the South China Sea. I know it's enclosed by the 9-, there's high seas there, and we need to manage, of course, the marine genetic resources in the high seas there, and that's covered by the BBNJ Treaty. And lastly, we also need to think about maybe ratifying the supplemental protocol to the CLC Convention. The supplemental protocol would increase the amount of coverage that can be paid for oil pollution damage in our waters, including in the exclusive economic zone. So those can be future legal addendas to protect not just the West Philippine Sea, but the entire maritime domain of the Philippines.
Thank you. We seem to have a very robust agenda to protect our national interests, including focusing on environmental security, the blue economy, creating a narrative, and ensuring that we have the appropriate legislation for these issues. We have another question from the floor. This time it's coming from students, and they're asking, how can maritime issues and the Philippine position be integrated in primary and secondary education? Again, anyone from the panel would like to answer, but perhaps for Dr. Colette, you can speak about the Australian experience, about how education in the primary and secondary levels also include advancing your own nation's national interest. But for the Filipinos in the panel, what are your thoughts about how can we ensure that the next generation would have a better understanding of these issues? Attorney Ganchun, would you like to start?
Yeah, because I don't think that Australia has the same big problem like the Philippines on maritime issues, right? So we have a very different experience with respect to this one. We just need to coordinate, of course, with the Department of Education and the Commission on Education, because you would need to put it in the curriculum of the students. You need a revise. For example, in the legal education, the Legal Education Board has revised the law curriculum, making it more responsive, based on the times, etc. So I think there's also a need to amend the curriculum of our students, just so to amend the discussion there on national territory, to let them see in their books the maritime zones of the Philippines. So it's easy as long as there's a decision already, let's say from the National Maritime Council, because it's a policy-making body. So long as the NMC makes a decision, okay, DepEd, you need to amend the curriculum and then place it in the books, then that can be implemented because a policy decision has been made. So just a picture there of the maritime zones would be enough. So our children can imagine that we actually have more water than land. The land area of the Philippines is 300,000 square kilometers, but its maritime area is about 2 million square kilometers, including the exclusive economic. It's a very vast maritime area. So our children needs to be aware of that and to appreciate that we are actually an archipelagic and maritime state, so that they grow up not thinking that we're land-based only, but we have a very huge maritime space.
So an awareness that our waters are actually larger than our land. General Browner, sir?
Yes. Well, for me, more than just awareness, what is really important is that we develop that sense of patriotism among our future generations. And one way to do that is by, again, implementing the Cub Scout, Boy Scout, Girl Scout system that we used to have in our schools. Somehow we lost this. And so for me, I believe that we have to go back to this, including bringing back the ROTC program in our schools. Through this, we develop not just an awareness about how we should defend our country as a nation, as a people, but develop that patriotism in ourselves, especially the younger generations, because they will be the future leaders of our nation.
Thank you, sir. Admiral?
Yeah, for the Coast Guard, I think we have done it already. We now have the comics, which we work together with the National Task Force in the West Philippine Sea. Very simple, but it hits the soul and the heart of the kids and those who are also thinking like kids. But more seriously, I think the answer is already before us. The forum is called Balangay Forum. So maybe it is high time for us to incorporate, maybe as a chapter, or maybe is as a separate subject itself, the maritime history of the Philippines. We have to go back to our history to understand what we are today. I think the Balangay Forum has said it well. Balangay as a subject, maybe, but in more simpler terms, yung pwede na natin gawin, the things that we can already do now. Well, one is the comics. It is very, very simple. But the more that you read it, the more that you realize your history, the issues now that we now have with the West Philippine Sea, how we are being confused through malign attacks. But there should be more to that. And I've been proposing this to the body. If we can make a coloring book, our friends and allies are here and partners, if we can develop a coloring book that we can introduce to preschoolers. Well, they're still in their mostly subconscious pa, the level of awareness. We can already introduce to them how maritime, how archipelagic their country is, subconsciously. Maybe primary and secondary is already a bit late. We should start as early as the child knows how to paint, color. And it won't cost us so much. I think after this forum, maybe some of our partners would want to take that challenge. The Coast Guard is ready to partner with you. And we can partner with the other departments of government through the National Maritime Council and the National Task Force West Philippine Sea. DepEd. All government, all arms of government relevant to this effort. Let's play with the minds if we want to change the way our people think what they are.
So intervention should start much earlier than the primary level. Dr. Colette, anything to add? Or
Sure. Australia is not an archipelago like the Philippines, but we do have an enormous coastline. And in fact, our EEZ is 8 million square kilometers. So maritime issues are very important to us as they are to you. I have primary school age children, and I think they'd be bamboozled by concepts about maritime domains and EEZs and UNCLOS, but they are very interested in marine life, marine animals, protecting the marine environment, and very concerned about, for example, dolphins being caught in fishing nets or marine plastics injuring turtles. And so I think With children, it's all about bringing it back to the issues that make sense to them at the community level, what they're really going to care about. So I think with maritime issues, that's a good place to start.
So going back to environmental security. For our last question for this morning's panel, this can also be the last remarks for each of our panelists. The question is this: considering the trajectory of the events in our maritime domain, how do we see ourselves in 5 years? Where should we be? So it's a looking forward type of question. General Browner?
In 5 years, your armed forces of the Philippines will be a more modern, more robust armed forces of the Philippines. We are now reorganizing the armed forces of the Philippines in order so we are organizing our cyber command in order to deal with the cyber threats. We're also reorganizing our Army, our Navy, and our Air Force in order for us to be able to operate the modern weapon systems, integrate all of them in order for us to, as I mentioned earlier, create that credible deterrent posture. But more importantly, in 5 years, we will see a better coalition of like-minded nations fostering a collective sense of respect for international law and the promotion of a rules-based international order.
Thank you so much, sir. Admiral?
Yeah, thank you. I think in 5 years, we have a good chance of seeing the Philippine Coast Guard emerging as the source of inspiration for all Coast Guards in Southeast Asia. Our end goal at the time is we should be able to do the rules-based actions that we must do, because we can do it because we have the right people who will interpret, implement it. As we see it now, actually, the Philippine Coast Guard has the highest concentration of maritime lawyers in this country. We have 16. Those who only went to 𝗜𝗏𝗏, but we still have others. We really are investing so much in our people to develop that kind of minds, the kind of hearts that will drive this country with a maritime and archipelagic psyche. The tools are forthcoming. We are due to receive 46 ships in 5 years. That will almost triple our fleet. Not to mention the hundreds of small boats that can sustain our governance activities elsewhere. We are also changing the doctrines that we have. We are increasingly adhering to what the law says. So in 5 years, I think the Philippine Coast Guard can become one of the reckoning points of other Coast Guards, which incidentally are younger than us. We were established in 1901. We were one of the earliest armed services in this country. I think we can achieve that for as long as we sustain these gains that we have. We have so many options. The West Philippine Sea is not a zero-sum game. The Philippines, again, is a maritime and archipelagic country, or archipelagic and maritime country. It offers us with so many opportunities to strengthen our foothold. We just have to always think. We just have to keep on innovating and creating opportunities to match our interests with the geostrategic challenges that we have. As a people, I think we can. We just have to chill, but we have to prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Colette, in 5 years, where do you see our bilateral relationship?
Well, I have no doubt that the bilateral relationship will be stronger than ever. It's just going from strength to strength at the moment. But in terms of the wider region, I hope where we'll be is in a place where we together have proved that the use of force and aggression is not only unacceptable, but actually ineffective, and that we will have a very strong coalition of partners who are unafraid to stand up for the rules-based order and international law.
Thank you. And Attorney Frenchman?
Yes, first I would like to thank, of course, the President for his very strong political will in defending the West Philippine Sea. And I'm hoping that in 5 years' time, we will have more support from the international community because for the arbitral award, because as explained by Dr. Colette, in the enforcement of the arbitral award, you really need the support of the international community. So I'm hoping that we have more support from our friends in the international community who believe in the binding nature of the award, who believe in the comprehensive legal framework, comprehensive legal maritime order established by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And I'm also hoping that with that broad support for the international community, we will have some peace in the West Philippine Sea. We keep on fighting, but of course we always aspire for some peace there. And in 5 years' time, I'm also hoping that with the creation of the Blue Economy Council, we will be properly managing already our vast marine and coastal resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this is all the time we have for this morning. We've had a rather robust discussion for this first panel, beginning with establishing the importance of the South China Sea as a vital waterway. We've also touched on the significance and the critical role that defending the rules-based international order is very important for each and everybody. We've also managed to touch on the agenda for the Philippines in protecting our maritime interests by highlighting that we need, of course, to focus on defense, but also to look at issues and developments beyond beyond defense. This is where the difference between the whole of government and the whole of nation approach would come in. And finally, we talked about future directions, from ensuring that the AFP becomes more modern to also making sure that we have a better coalition of like-minded nations with support from the international community and falling back on international law. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panel for this morning.
Thank you very much to our first panel and to our panel moderator for the very engaging and insightful discussion. May we request the presence of Secretary Teodoro, Vice Admiral Alano, and Secretary Centino on stage to present the tokens of appreciation to our first panel. Once again, thank you very much to our first panel and to Secretary Teodoro, Vice Admiral Alano, and Secretary Centino. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a break for 5 minutes, and we will then promptly begin with the second panel of today's engagement. Thank you very much.
of the role of science and technology in maritime security, it is my pleasure to invite to the stage the moderator of the second panel, Director Christine June Carino.
So thank you, Attorney Karen. So from a very focused and engaging discussion on the West Philippine Sea in our first panel, we shall now move beyond to discuss the broader body of water that surrounds our nation, soil, and nourish the Filipino people as well as the peoples of our neighboring countries. So as we convene for today's panel on the role of science and technology in maritime security, it is essential to highlight the critical role of science and technology in enhancing maritime security in the Philippines. Our archipelago, comprising over 7,000 islands, presents unique challenges in securing vast marine territories that are vital for national defense and environmental protection. In the face of challenges like territorial disputes, illegal fishing, smuggling, and climate change, embracing these technologies is crucial for sustainable resource management and the safeguarding of our maritime environments. By exploring the integration of science and technology in maritime security and governance, we can better address the aforementioned issues, ultimately strengthening our maritime security framework. These discussions in our second panel will help illuminate how science and technology can be leveraged to safeguard our waters and our people. To kick off our discussion, I would like to introduce our first presenter. Dr. 𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗃 III is a distinguished academic and leader in the field of environmental and marine sciences. Currently, he serves as a professor emeritus at the Institute of Environmental and Marine Sciences at Silliman University, as well as an adjunct professor at the School of Environmental Science and Management at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. His expertise is further demonstrated through his roles as a senior fellow and member of the Academic Council at the Development Academy of the Philippines, a senior fellow at the Southeast Asia Center for Graduate Studies and Research in Agriculture, and a senior research fellow for the 𝗵𝗆 USAID University of Rhode Island Fish Right Program. Previously, Dr. 𝗵𝗂𝗂𝗃 served as president of Silliman University and held the position of professor and dean at the School of Environmental Science and Management at UP Los Baños. His commitment to public service is exemplified by his tenure as Undersecretary at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources for the Government of the Philippines. 𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗃 III holds a PhD in Wildland Resource Science from the University of California, Berkeley, along with 2 master's degrees from Ohio University, one in International Affairs, majoring in economics, and another in philosophy, focusing on the philosophy of science. He also earned a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Dr. 𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗃 III will be discussing the significance of science diplomacy in securing Philippines' maritime interests. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. 𝗵𝗂𝗃.
Thank you very much. May we have the first slide, please? I'll be talking about the environmental and science diplomacy as a way or as an approach to strengthen and sustain human ecological security in the West Philippine Sea. Next slide, please. The materials that I use here are from many sources, but unless otherwise stated, the views presented in these slides are views of the author. They are intended only to incite insights and discussions. No policy position is being advanced. Next slide, please. Human ecological security refers to a state of low risks and vulnerabilities of people-environment interactions in a place and time, where the productive harmony, mutual enrichment, and sustained balanced functioning of economic, sociocultural, and ecological systems are high and offers a natural heritage of high value to people. So I'd like to reframe the concept of defense or security from that of defense or security of people's lives and property, including territory, to that of the interaction of human and environment, including the ecology of their place. Kasi without ecology, there is no society. Next slide, please. The West Philippine Sea is a living waters of substantial heritage value to peoples in the Philippines and in the South China Sea Basin. Ito yung sinasabi natin, pamana natin galing sa nature ang karagatan ng Pilipinas. It has fisheries, 27% of our total national catch, estimated at 40.6 billion in 2018, with high alimentary value come from the West Philippine Sea. We are among the high biodiversity areas of the world, so that the biodiversity potentials of the West Philippine Sea is very high. And let's be remembering that the biotechnology, global biotechnology industry is estimated to reach $244 trillion by 2028. It offers chlorophyll, connectivity, and climate regulation around the entire South China Sea. So the ecosystems in the West Philippine Sea affects so much of the entire ecosystem of the South China Sea that the living waters of the South China Sea are actually being fed by the living waters of the West Philippine Sea. And if you notice, in terms of climate regulation, the last typhoon we had was just rainfall here. That was Enteng. But when it passed through the West Philippine Sea and into the South China Sea, it became a super typhoon when it reached the South China region. Again, that is because of the ability of the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea to actually affect the weather and climate around the South China Sea basin. Transiting commerce, about 62.21 billion of our imports and 89.81 billion of our imports and exports come and go through the West Philippine Sea. And of course, tourism is of high value in the West Philippine Sea. For this reason, next slide please, we can see that people-nature interactions generate economic value, socio-cultural value, and ecological value, and there are enhancers or diminishers of these people-nature interactions. These are threats to this action. But the extent to which these functions, ecological value and economic value are high, it creates a high heritage value. Mataas ang pamana natin sa karagatan natin. And that pamana improves our human ecological security. And to me, human ecological security is a most basic national and global security concern. It goes beyond even just the security of human species, but the security of life systems on the planet itself. Next slide. And there are major threats to human ecological security in the West Philippine Sea, including climate change and pollution, anthropogenic threats, including overfishing, illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing, including uncontrolled access by distant water fleets, reclamations and coastal modifications, and of course, conflicts. And all of these threats can be better informed and addressed by science. Next slide. And so, what is science diplomacy? Science diplomacy is a scientific collaboration among states to address a common problem, interest, or issue, even if otherwise these states are at odds with each other over other problems, interests, or issues. It can be in the form of science in diplomacy, meaning to say science informs the diplomats, diplomacy for science or diplomacy to advance science, or science for diplomacy, science acting as a mode of diplomacy, creating a committee among nations over a scientific common interests. So this is where I think that science and environmental diplomacy could be a potent force to ensure that the security, human ecological security of our country would be secured. Next slide, please. An option that can be considered is a Philippine-designed and led multinational open environmental science program with an aim to conserve and sustain living and non-living resources in the West Philippine Sea and nearby seascapes. This would be in compliance with the Philippine rights and obligations under UNCLOS. Because under UNCLOS, signatory states like the Philippines could engage other states to protect and sustain its seas and do scientific research in its own seas. So this is the basihan for this kind of diplomacy that I think is possible for us to do in the West Philippine Sea. Next slide. Why environmental and science diplomacy in the West Philippine Sea? I see this as the major reasons for this. Number one, it would allow the mobilization of science in service of humanity's collective marine environmental interests. There's no doubt that the oceans is a common interest to everybody. Create additional alliances to address ecological commons and bolster foreign relations. Again, an open science program is when you invite other countries and other entities from not necessarily within your countries to join you in addressing a common problem that relates to our oceans. It prevents epic ecological cost, meaning the cost of losing life systems and ecosystems, while conflicts over epochal political gains are being resolved. Political gains are just a matter of epochs, but loss of life systems would be epic. Secure life-supporting and life-sustaining ecosystems, and for the Philippines, to saturate the West Philippine Sea with peaceful multinational science research assets and personnel, and reduce the political viability of gunboat diplomacy and use of coercive force. Deterrence is not necessarily in terms only of military might. Deterrence can be in the sense that there is a significant change in the landscape in the area that belligerents would have very difficult time to advance. And we think that science diplomacy, as well as environmental science, collaborating with other nations for the common purpose of sustaining the ecosystems of the South China Sea as a whole, would be a good way to do this. Another way is that it is an off-ramping. Maybe for people who are uncomfortable with the current situation, including uncomfortable with their own belligerent activities in the South China Sea, they might want to do science as a way of off-ramping from these options, from this policy, unpleasant policy consequences. And finally, because it is a constitutional fate, Section 2 of our Constitution renounces war as instrument of national policy and adheres to a policy of peace, freedom, cooperation, and amity with all nations. To me, this is why environmental and science diplomacy is a very good option for us to consider in the West Philippine Sea. Next slide. Examples of human ecological security enhancing science diplomacy over shared seas are this lang, tatlo lang ito, Atlantic Alliance, the Arctic Council, and the Antarctic Treaty. There are problems with these. But one thing for sure, there has not been much belligerence among the parties in all these years while these councils were in effect. The issue is not conflict necessarily. The issue should be first and foremost control of belligerence. We can continue to have our conflicting interests, conflicting aspirations, conflicting claims, but so long as there is no belligerence, we can continue working together in a diplomatic and civilized way. Next slide. This is the cost. If you do, in the Antarctic, in that case of Antarctica, the United States spent $206 million in 2022. Australia was about $190 million in 2020 to 2021, and the UK 47 million pounds in 2022. And yet, the Antarctic Treaty was the one that caused us to realize a big problem with humanity, and that was the loss of the ozone layer. And it is because of these efforts in the Antarctic, through research and science, that we are now able to reduce the loss of our ozone layer. So the whole of humanity has been benefiting from such a low investment on collaborative science in Antarctica. And yet, if you go for fighting each other, average cost to operate an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is around $140 million a year. And the average cost to operate an aircraft carrier is $1.8 billion per year, and maintenance cost of $2 to $4 billion every 32 years. And you don't need only one carrier or one destroyer in order to engage in a warfare. And so, very clearly, belligerence is costlier than non-belligerence. So this is to me a very good argument why I think all rational civilizations should push for more science and environmental diplomacy over our shared oceans, even if we have conflicting interests over the shared ocean. Next slide. The WPS challenge on human ecological security would be scientific collaborations could ease tensions in the South China Sea. So our problem is this. Should we go for conflict to achieve epochal gains like territory and jurisdiction? Or should we go for environmental and science diplomacy to prevent epic losses of resource systems and life support systems in the West Philippine Sea and the entire South China Sea? Because these are all connected ecosystems. One thing for sure, the South China Sea is a lake-like sea. It's almost like a lake. The egress and ingress areas of the South China Sea is very limited to just the Bashi Channel, Taiwan Strait, Malacca Strait, and Celebes. So what happens in one part of the South China Sea could affect the entirety of the life support system in the West Philippine Sea, in the whole South China Sea. So next slide. My take. Given the environmental uncertainties and rising political tensions in the West Philippine Sea, science and environmental diplomacy is one urgent option for the Philippines to consider at this time to improve its defense posture and position in the area, more than just defense of people and property, but defense of people and life systems. That is, in addition to its other measures to defend its rights to the seascape under UNCLOS and other laws. So maybe, just maybe, for the Philippine government to consider that along with its existing other postures, science and environmental diplomacy can be one other option. Yung anti-access at saka access denial strategy could be in the form of so many science personnel and vessels and assets of many nations being there together to promote the common heritage value of our seas for all of our humanities, including the communities in the South China Sea. Next slide. That's it. Thank you very much.
So thank you for that very enlightening discussion, Dr. Ben. The next speaker for this session is Director General Joel Joseph Marciano, who will discuss the topic leveraging space technology to enhance Philippine maritime security and interests. Director General Marciano is the first and current Director General of the Philippine Space Agency, or PhilSA. As PhilSA Director General, he holds the rank of a Cabinet Secretary and serves as Presidential Advisor on Space Matters. Dr. Marciano is also a full professor of Electrical and Electronics Engineering at the University of the Philippines, where he held the Dado and Maria Banatao Professorial Chair in Engineering. He obtained his PhD in Electrical Engineering and Telecommunications from the University of New South Wales in Australia and was the UP Dado Banatao Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley and UC San Diego. From 2014 to 2020, he led the development of the Philippines' Diwata microsatellites and Maya nanosatellites and activities in ground operations, data processing, calibration, and distribution. Dr. Marciano is the recipient of several recognitions for his research, teaching, and public service. In January 2023, he was conferred an honorary doctorate by Hokkaido University for distinguished contributions to advancing education and research via international exchanges. Ladies and gentlemen, Director General Marciano.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a pleasure and honor to be here this morning to talk about space. Thank you to Presidential Office for Maritime Concerns and the Department of National Defense and all the organizers for inviting us here. 𝗷𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗃𝗃 is a term that we invented. We translated literally, it means space wealth, space riches. But figuratively, it refers to the collective resources of the country that is emergent in terms of people, institutions, policies, the environment that allow us to seize opportunities in the burgeoning global space economy. And so I tweaked it a little bit. Instead of talking about exclusively space technologies, I am referring to a space ecosystem. And that is what 𝗷𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗃𝗃 really refers to in the Philippines. So you can call our emerging space, domestic space ecosystem in the country, 𝗷𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗃𝗃. Okay, I should point. There you go. First, a situationer. This global space economy that I mentioned is worth, according to some estimates, about $500 billion now. It's divided into upstream and downstream. Upstream is everything that goes up there. The satellites, the spacecraft, everything that brings them up there, the rockets, the spaceports, everything that keeps them up there, the ground station equipment and the command and control systems, all the manufacturing that happens and the hardware, software, that's upstream. It's a small percentage of this global space economy, but it is fast increasing. This global space economy is increasing by 8% per year. According to McKinsey, will reach a $1.5 trillion space economy by 2035. Of course, when we put things up there, we use them. That is the downstream. So what are the applications? Internet, telecommunications, positioning, navigation, and timing, and certainly Earth observation and surveillance. Anybody who has flicked a light switch this morning has used space technology because the power grid relies on very precise position and timing provided by satellites and that infrastructure. So this is the backdrop by which our space endeavors are now set upon. A few more charts here. The pandemic did not really stop this industry. You can see there an exponential rise. Around, hope this has a laser pointer. Let me see if it has one. I don't know, no? Okay, you can see around 2020, there's that basically where that sharp rise is in the number of space objects brought to space. So I think it was an opportunity during the pandemic when every other industry kind of had a downturn. Rockets were flying to space, bringing stuff to space. Notably, companies like SpaceX were deploying satellites. We see there that basically that exponential rise. And a particular subset of these satellites and spacecraft are called small sats. These are satellites that are about maybe 600 kilograms, weighing 600 kilograms below, not really the size of automobiles, but maybe smaller, right? In the same way that we do not like to carry large cell phones on our pockets, satellites are becoming smaller, yet their power is being maintained. And instead of flying one big satellite that costs billions of, hundreds of millions of dollars, and taking 2, 5 years, 10 years to complete it, you can build 100 of these small satellites weighing 100 kilograms, 200 kilograms each, to form a constellation. So that's what's happened in the past decade or so. You see here the distribution over time of these so-called small sats by mission type. This is from Bryce Tech. And up until about 2020, a big portion of them were for remote sensing. Those are satellites that carry cameras that take pictures of the Earth at low Earth orbit. And you also have some satellites for technology development, basically bringing things to space to test it in that hostile environment to see whether it will work properly. Those are new technologies being introduced. And then certainly you have communications. But from 2020 onwards, a large percentage of these small sats deployed into low Earth orbit have been for telecommunications and internet, as this chart shows. And so PhilSA, our National Space Agency, was established 5 years ago by Republic Act 11363, the Philippine Space Act, signed by former President Duterte. And it is the central government agency in the country that addresses all national issues related to space science and technology and its applications, or SSTA. Yes, PhilSA is the name. It is actually in the law. It's not PSA, so that is the name. It's contrary to maybe common belief that it is somehow under the Department of Science and Technology. It is not. It is placed directly under the Office of the President. But there is certainly a lot of synergy with the DOST on various fronts, either upstream or downstream, as mentioned earlier. There is a Philippine Space Council, which is a very high-level council, the President. This was presided over these meetings. Right, and the President is keenly aware of the National Space Program. In fact, in 2022, in the United Nations General Assembly in New York, he had the following words, and I quote, "The Philippines is preparing for the future by laying the governance framework that will allow us to pursue digital solutions towards a more modern economy and expand our presence in outer space. We need to start by defining the norms of responsible behavior in cyberspace and outer space." End quote. In the Philippine space policy, we kind of captured a little bit, some of the provisions there, maybe I click, the declaration of policy, some relevant items in regards to national security. To safeguard Philippine sovereignty, territorial integrity, Philippine interest, and the right to self-determination as mandated by Article 2, Section 7 of the 1987 Constitution. Then there is to support and commit to the development, application, and utilization of science and technology that will foster patriotism and nationalism and accelerate social progress, such as the development of space technology and its applications for its security and for the benefit of its citizens, and to ensure access to space and its environs as a sovereign right in the promotion of national security towards the attainment and protection of national interests. Furthermore, there are these key development areas that serve as the framework of the national space policy. So in the context of a country like the Philippines, we get asked a lot, why do we even have a space agency? Well, the quick answer to that is, let's take out a map, look at what we are, where we are. And we're celebrating that this month. It's Maritime Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month. We are thousands of islands separated by bodies of water. We need to bridge these islands. We need to connect them. We need to uplift the condition in these islands. And the vantage point, the ultimate high ground of space, should certainly be one of the tools in our tool chest as a country. So there is national security and development, space research and development, hazard management and climate studies, space education and awareness, space industry capacity building, international cooperation. Where we are is that we are in the Pacific Ring of Fire, we're in the typhoon belt. I don't think that will change very soon. So we have to have these tools from the vantage point of space where we can address hazard management and certainly climate change over a long record of data. And finally here, powers and functions, just to maybe highlight. There is this part I should just highlight about improved public access and resource sharing. Letter B, assist departments and other agencies of the state as well as the private sector in the utilization of space science and technology applications and data or information to aid in the performance of respective mandates and duties. You will see some examples of that in the subsequent slides. Okay. Moving on. The National Space Program has a strategic framework. Taking the Philippine space policy, we've translated this into this so-called value chain, which we have adopted. First of all, the satellites and upstream infrastructure. Secondly, the data and services from these satellites being suitably accessible. Third, ground infrastructure for downloading and hosting such data and services. Next, the capacity to analyze and generate insights. The impetus and resources to act, which is really the value of depth. All of these, if they come together, if they exist, if our answer as a country to these blocks is yes, we have that, we have commensurate strength, or we have partners in each of these blocks, then at the end, if they act together, we can arrive and realize socioeconomic value and benefit for Filipinos and for the world. This is the value chain that frames the National Space Program, which allows us to communicate the different activities of our space agency and this ecosystem to the wider public and to our partners internationally. Supporting the space data value chain would be, of course, R&D, education capacity building, public outreach, policy planning, and international cooperation. Okay, I will talk about satellites and upstream infrastructure, this capacity to analyze and generate insights, and the impetus and resources to act. So quickly, we have been building satellites, but maybe in this chart, what is important to note is as we build them, we've sent students to Japanese universities before through DOST programs, before 𝗬𝗪𝗂 was born, and now 𝗬𝗪𝗂 taking over, the baton has been passed to the space agency, and we continue building satellites. And increasingly, as we do that, we are trying to increase local content in these satellites by engaging small and medium enterprises in the country, either for machining, electronics fabrication, or component suppliers in the country, trying to test the local supply chain and documenting that along the way. Okay. So much so that when we have Diwata 3, it will carry the successor of Diwata 1 and Diwata 2. It will carry 9 locally developed components into space. And if a value of a component on Earth is X, the value of a component working in space could be 20X, 50X even. So it opens new doors for semiconductors, electronics industries in the country to turn around, face that global market and that supply chain so they can have their components into their satellites as well. This is the roadmap. Maybe just focus on that third tier where you have the yellow bar. MULA is our current project. This is now being built by 16 Filipino engineers in an industrial setting in the United Kingdom. So they're building it together with engineers in the UK. And I should note that when they come back, we will have a license to remanufacture this satellite in the Philippines. And when we do that, we will increase local content here, engaging local companies. It will lead to a series of other satellites with other payloads that matter to the country. So by building upstream capabilities, we are in better control, perhaps, of the value chain in terms of the accessibility, but most importantly, the suitability of the data. If data is like water that flows into our faucets at home, we seldom care about the plumbing that brings the water into our houses. So long as you turn the faucet, the water flows. But those that control the plumbing control the flow of water, the price of water, and whether you get water at all. So this is something that we're building proficiency in, especially for local companies and industries. Moving on, just to highlight, the Philippines is on the main chart. You see, not on the sidebar in terms of government satellites. Very happy to see this. This is a fairly recent report, 2023, by Bryce Tech, putting us in the league of countries you see there in the chart with 5 or more government small satellites. In the sidebar, you see the other countries there. And this, we're continuing to follow these industry reports. Okay, I should speed up. We are in the midst of building this space industry policy and roadmap as an offshoot of the Philippine space policy. So by first quarter next year, we will hold a forum like this. We will invite various stakeholders to talk about the space industry roadmap for the Philippines. So something to look forward to. And now, we have a battle cry. It's called Akyat Pilipinas. Angkop sa kalawakan, yari at tatak Pilipinas. That means suitable for space, built and branded Philippines. This supports 2 things. Number 1, the Tatak Pinoy Act, wherein we're trying to increase the economic complexity of the Philippines by building perhaps more difficult products in the country that can compete in the global market. So we supported that, and now it's a law, the Tatak Pinoy Act. And also certainly we look forward, I don't think it's an SRDP Act yet, but we look forward to the signing of this bill, wherein we can get behind it with space technology certainly being dual use, civilian and military, and supporting the defense industrial complex in the Philippines through space qualified components. In terms of the downstream, these are the activities. We mobilize data, that means providing satellite images, conducting capacity building, and providing technical advisory. So very quickly, this is one example of a map that is routinely produced. These are artificial intelligence algorithms detecting ships and bodies of water and counting them. So while by itself, as a snapshot, it might not amount to much, but doing this over time, we can probably uncover trends and patterns of behavior in terms of clustering of ships and where they go. When a typhoon is approaching, where do they seek shelter? Things like that, and where do they converge when certain events happen? This is one product that is being developed, value adding from the satellite imagery. Next, oil spills, of course, maritime concerns in terms of environmental degradation. We use the vantage point of space to track the spread of oil. As the Marine Science Institute uses these snapshots to refine their models and predict when the oil is going to reach coastlines and when it will affect the population. So that's being generated. And benthic habitats, in terms of studying coral reefs, seagrasses, etc., trying to conduct an inventory of these resources. Again, we can try to do this collectively by leveraging space capabilities. Okay, so classifying whether it's sand, coral, seagrass, deep water clouds, and of course even built infrastructure on some of these places can be tracked in terms of doing change detection algorithms. Right, so much so that, well, capacity building wise, there was around 134,000 person hours of trainings conducted by your space agency in 2023 alone. Certainly with the defense and security establishment, a lot of these engagements were done with your groups, and we continue to do it, and we're committed to spread this capability and make it pervasive across different units in the country. Technical advisory, you see there time-lapse of rocket debris from certain rocket launches that have been dropped in certain drop zones in the country. So we do issue these technical advisories. We try to track them as best as we can and issue advisories. We thank the Coast Guard and for issuing notice to mariners in terms of, as a result of these advisories, or taking action from these data and advisories. Of course, there's some pictures of the training and engagements. We skip that. Now, partnerships are key because we are just a space agency. In terms of the impetus and resources to act, we do not make the decisions in terms of maritime domain awareness, agriculture, food security, disaster risk reduction, and management. So that's why 13 space data mobilization agreements, we call it, were signed over a period of around 1.5 years, with various groups. Highlighted there are the ones related to the marine maritime environment, most recently with the Philippine Coast Guard. And just a quick note, this month, next month, October, we are now inaugurating this Copernicus data center that is now being hosted by your Philippine Space Agency. When Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen visited Manila last year, she talked about this first in space cooperation between Europe and the Philippines. and how they're putting up a Copernicus mirror site in the Philippines. This is free and open data which we can all use. And now it is closer to all of us because it is being hosted in the premises of the Philippine Space Agency for possible distribution, not just within the country, but areas of interest around the region. You see there in the red AOIs there. This will support services in ground motion monitoring, land cover mapping, satellite to be launched into space so far. May they inspire the next generation of Filipino students to follow in their footsteps and reach for the stars. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
So thank you, Director General Marciano, for that very informative and exciting presentation, one that is filled with prospects for the Philippines. And for our last speaker for this morning, he will be none other than Undersecretary Giovanni Carlo J. Bacordo, who will discuss the significance of securing and harnessing Philippine waters. 𝗂𝗏 Bacordo was appointed as Undersecretary of the Department of Energy in September 2022. Prior to his appointment, Undersecretary Bacordo served as the 38th Flag Officer in Command of the Philippine Navy from February 3, 2020 up to June 8, 2021. He was a naval defense professional with 38 years of experience in command and leadership, both aboard ship and ashore. His surface war expertise and leadership roles in key positions throughout his military career led him to consistently pursue and instigate vital acquisitions for the Navy's modernization program and transformation initiatives. As Undersecretary, 𝗂𝗏 Bacordo is responsible for leading and representing the Department of Energy in several key government bodies. These include the National Government Bangsamoro Government Intergovernmental Relations Body, the Intergovernmental Energy Board, and the Bangsamoro Sustainable Development Board. He also serves on the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea, the National Intelligence Board, and the National Cybersecurity Interagency Committee. Additionally, he holds positions as the alternate chairperson of the Philippine National Oil Company Exploration Corporation, the alternate vice chairperson of the National Power Board, and is a member of the National Maritime Council. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to Undersecretary Bacordo.
I am the only non-scientist here on stage, and it's quite mesmerizing to be grouped with the scientists. And earlier I asked Director Jessie Pascasio why I'm here on stage with the scientists, and they said I have a 4-year degree in military sciences. So I hope that makes me a scientist as well. First, I would like to thank the Department of National Defense, the Foundation for the National Interest, and the Waypoints Project for organizing this event and inviting the Department of Energy here to give us a chance to show to you the different initiatives that we have here at the department. Next slide. Okay, my presentation will follow this outline. First, the current energy situation, the long-term energy goals as embodied in the Philippine Energy Plan 2023 to 2050, and also the existing and potential energy projects in Philippine waters, and the key takeaways. So next slide. For the first part, what do we have? So here, we're showing you here the energy sector strategic framework. On the right side, that is our strategic objectives. First is the access to affordable energy. You may not believe it, but in a study made by the International Energy Consultants of Australia, made in 2023, the cost of electricity in Luzon is 7% below the world average. In fact, our cost of power is even lower than that of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, once their government subsidies are removed. And then part of the findings of these IEC consultants is that most of the high-cost markets are heavily dependent on imported fossil fuel. And another finding is that most of these low-cost markets have significant nuclear generation capacity. Another strategic objective is to have reliable source power generation, reliable in the sense that it's consistently available when needed without frequent interruptions. It's resilient in the sense that the system can withstand and quickly recover, considering that we are in the Pacific Ring of Fire, we are in the typhoon belt. Indeed, our energy infrastructure should be resilient. Clean, low or zero emissions with the minimum environmental impact. In short, go renewable and sustainable. The keyword for sustainable is go indigenous. Again, this strategic objectives of the Department of Energy is aligned with the Philippine Development Plan, the President's 8-point socio-economic agenda, and the ambition natin 2040. Next slide, the ARC objectives. Consistent with the strategic objectives that I've shown earlier, these are the different initiatives that the Department of Energy is pushing through to ensure that the strategic objectives of access to affordable energy, the strategic objective of reliable and resilient energy supply, and the strategic objective of clean and sustainable energy will be realized. Next slide. Okay, so I'm showing here is the 2023 primary energy mix. Currently, the country's energy needs is supplied with a mix of fossil fuel and RE sources. It is saddening to note that 53.7% of the total primary energy supply is imported. For coal, for example, more than 90% of our coal requirements is imported. And of that 90%, 98% is sourced from Indonesia. Our oil, our crude oil, majority of the country's crude oil comes from the Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, and the UAE. For the refined petroleum products, these are primarily sourced from our Asia-Pacific neighbors and some parts of Oceania, Africa, and Europe. In short, the country is practically oil import dependent. As an import dependent nation, we often face several economic challenges when prices are going up in the international market. I would like to recall the events of 2022, when the pump prices of diesel and premium gasoline almost breached the 100 peso per liter mark. For LNG, our indigenous LNG supply is sourced from Malampaya. Before, it was 100% sourced from Malampaya. For the last 20 years, it was only in 2023 when we started buying Malampaya from abroad. So right now, our imported LNG is 26% of our overall gas supply. This is actually a major energy security concern. Next slide. Okay, so looking at the slide, if looking at our installed capacity, 28.3 gigawatts, that means of all of the generating capacity is operating, then it will produce a power of 28.3 gigawatts. But then again, we have to consider the dependable capacity, what it can actually deliver, given the imperfections. What this power generation can deliver is just 24.7 gigawatts. That is the whole country's capacity already. And looking at the left side of the slide, we see there the power generation. If looking at the power generation, 77.3% is powered by fossil fuel. Earlier, I mentioned that we are so dependent on imports for this fossil fuel, and only 22.3% is generated by renewable energy. Okay, next slide. So with that as a premise, these are now our long-term energy goals. We have this Philippine Energy Plan of 2023 to 2050. In the reference scenario, as embodied in the National Renewable Energy Program, we are targeting for 35% RE share by 2030 and 50% RE share by 2040, and more than 50% of the RE share by 2050. Take note that in the previous slide, I said there that the current RE share in the power generation mix is just 22.3%. And in the clean energy scenario, we are now introducing coal repurposing of the existing coal-fired power plants. Coal-fired power plants having a technical life of about 40 to 50 years. And then introducing a nuclear capacity of 1.2 gigawatts by 2032, 2.4 gigawatts by 2035, and 4.8 gigawatts by 2050. And then also introducing offshore wind, aiming for 19 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050. That's for clean energy scenario 1, and 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050. I will explain all this in the later slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, so all in all, this is the future energy scenario in a capsule, implementing energy efficiency and conservation measures, increasing the penetration of renewable energy sources, advancing alternative fuels and emerging technologies, adapting ICT in the energy chain with the installation of advanced smart grid technologies, and fortifying our energy infrastructure to be resilient and climate-proof. With your indulgence, allow me to drink some water because I'm just recovering from the cold. And this is not actually my natural singing voice. This is my voice after recovering from the cough and cold, hence the deep baritone voice. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now let me present the existing and potential energy projects located in the Philippine waters that need to be secured and protected. Next slide. Okay, so for our upstream petroleum, there are 16 sedimentary areas identified and classified according to their potential. So the most prospective basins are shown here on green, the prospective basins in yellow, and the frontier basins in red. The exploration and development of these indigenous petroleum resources are offered to investors as part of the Philippine Conventional Energy Contracting Program, or we call it the PCEPs. Okay, next slide. So currently, there are 15 active petroleum service contracts being supervised and monitored by the Department of Energy. Of the 15 service contracts, we have 11 offshore service contracts. And of these 11 offshore service contracts, 9 are located in the West Philippine Sea. Okay, next slide. For the petroleum service contracts in the West Philippine Sea, there are currently 2 active petroleum producing fields in the Philippines. The Malampaya gas field, and which will run out by 2027, and the Galok oil field, which may run out by December of 2025. Let me just give you some trivia about how important these gas fields are to us. Malampaya has provided 30% of Luzon's power for the last 20 years. In short, we had a jackpot by international standards. We made a jackpot with Malampaya. During its peak, it has provided 40% of Luzon's power. And it has contributed 374 billion in the national treasury. So due to the Malampaya's dwindling reserves, we have resorted to imported LNG starting only in 2023. If I am to use Malampaya as a measure, the untapped potential resource in the West Philippine Sea alone is about 16 Malampayas. We are missing an estimated potential of 52.8 trillion cubic feet of gas and 10.1 billion barrels of oil. This is only the best estimate of the potential resources in the West Philippine Sea. And I have to quote the Secretary of National Defense in the AVR showed earlier. He said, "Pag-asa natin ang West Philippine Sea." Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So on ocean energy, in 1996, the UNDP assisted study undertaken by the Norwegian agency, that is the Oceanographic Company of Norway, revealed that the country has an enormous potential for ocean energy, such as the wave energy, ocean thermal energy conversion, and ocean tidal. The wave energy is the slide here on the left side, that portion in blue showing the areas of the highest wave energy potential. And here on the right side, the reddish yellowish color shown in the areas with the highest potential in ocean thermal energy sites. So it's saying here that the warm surface waters and the cooler deep waters present opportunities for OTEC technology, with the capacity of estimated at 265 million megawatts, if only we can harness even 1/10 of this power. Okay, next slide, please. And on another ocean energy technology, which is tidal energy, shown here in blue, are the areas with the highest potential on tidal energy. Currently, feasibility studies are being conducted by private energy companies to assess the viability of tidal in-stream energy in these potential sites. So next slide. So with that, as of June 2024, we have a total of 9 ocean energy service contracts in the different stages of development. Okay, next slide on offshore wind energy. Okay, so in offshore wind energy, based on the 2019 World Bank study, it has identified that we have a potential of 178 gigawatts. I would like to bring you back earlier to our installed capacity. If you remember, I mentioned that we have only an installed capacity of 28.3 gigawatts. Imagine in offshore wind alone, we have a potential of 178 gigawatts. If we can harness 100% of that, we can power 6 more Philippines. To boost the development of these offshore wind areas, the President signed EO21 way back in April 2023, which from there, the Department of Energy came up with the offshore wind policy and an administrative framework for offshore wind to ensure that offshore wind will really take off in this country. So that OPAF, or the Offshore Wind Policy and Administrative Framework, in short, it is directing all government agencies to review the permitting process. It's directing all government agencies to review the permitting fees. And that EO21 is invoking the whole of government approach. So next slide. And from there, currently we have 92 offshore wind energy service contracts located in these areas in blue. And these areas of the highest wind potential are located in Northwest Luzon, west of Manila, north of Mindoro, west of Mindoro, Panay, Guimaras, and Negros. I can understand really why there's a highest wind potential in the areas of Northwest Luzon. It's facing the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. It's open. West of Manila, because again, it's open to the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea. North and South Mindoro, also open winds coming from the West Philippine Sea. But what I cannot understand, why there's a high wind potential in the areas of Panay, Guimaras, and Negros, and it is covered from the east and the west. And I can only say that because the people who live there are Ilonggos, masyadong mahangin, very windy people, and that accounts for the high wind potential of Panay, Guimaras, and Negros areas. Again, if only 50% of this 66.5 gigawatts can be realized, we'll be powering another Philippines. It will more than double our existing capacity. Okay, next slide. In support to the development of offshore wind energy, we have identified 31 ports. Excuse me. In support of the development of offshore wind energy, we have identified 31 ports for use either as a marshalling port or a manufacturing port or an O&M port. These ports, one takeaway that I learned visiting European countries who are in the advanced stages already in offshore wind is that no offshore wind project can take off without the offshore wind ports. What you see here in northern Luzon, like in Bangi, you see the onshore wind turbines. That is just about 3 to 5 megawatts per turbine. The current technology is about 15 18 gigawatts turbines for offshore wind. And that is about as tall as the Eiffel Tower. These are how each blade measuring about 100 to 120 meters. You can just see how huge these projects are. That is the reason why these components cannot pass through land. It has to have from the source to the port, and from the port to the area where it will be planted or floated. So that's why it cannot pass through land. So the size, so no port in the world is ready for offshore wind unless it is repurposed for offshore wind. Let me cite to you some example. Our current Philippine ports has a load-bearing capacity of about 6 to 8 tons per square meter. The requirement for offshore wind is about 30 to 50 tons per square meter. And then the area of a typical port for offshore wind for one developer only during the manufacturing phase is 24 hectares. That's the minimum working area for one developer at a time. Again, at a load bearing of 30 to 50 tons per square meter. So again, the characteristics of offshore wind ports is so different from regular ports. Okay, next slide, please. And for our takeaways. Next slide. Okay, for the takeaways. So I mentioned to you that more than half of our total primary energy supply is imported RE. And the RE is imported rather, and RE only comprises 22.3% of the power generation mix. We need to increase that RE capacity to more than 50% by 2050. We aim to increase the RE share in the power generation mix to 35% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. And in the clean energy scenario, we introducing coal repurposing, nuclear capacity, and offshore wind. We have 11 petroleum service contracts in the WPS. The estimate of the potential resource in the West Philippine Sea is about 16 malampayas. The country has an enormous potential for ocean energy technologies, and their offshore wind potential is 178 gigawatts. One takeaway that I learned here in the Department of Energy when I first reported, and it's quite saddening, that whatever we are starting now will be felt 10 years from now. Because like offshore wind, the pre-development is 7 years, 2 years for the construction before you feel the first kilowatt hour. The same with oil and gas exploration, the pre-development is 7 years, the exploration, and then 2 years for the actual drilling, and you will feel the offtake already in the 10th year. So I hope that there'll be a continuity in the initiatives now so that we will feel all of this power by 2028 and beyond. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Undersecretary Bacordo, for that insightful presentation of how our energy resources also make up a critical part of our maritime resources. Now we're on to our open forum, and I will also be joining our panel on stage. Similar to Undersecretary Bacordo, as a non-scientist, my closest link would be my political science degree. So we will now have the opportunity to ask our speakers any questions we may have on their presentations. For our on-site participants here at the Hteros, if you would like to ask a question, you can write your questions down and give it to the organizers on standby. So they'll be positioned strategically within the hall. And for our participants in Zoom, you may post your questions in the chat box. The questions shall then be forwarded here on stage for our panel to answer. Okay. So there's already a first question. And the question is, how do we further connect science and technology to policy making? Do you see any challenges and gaps? I think this particular question applies to all our three presenters. If we may ask our first presenter, Dr. 𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗿, to respond, followed by Director General Marciano and Undersecretary 𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗫𝗿.
I think there are two problems in my view. The first is the problem of language. For scientists, they are fond of using technical language precisely because technical language are very precise with respect to meaning. Yet on the other hand, politicians and policymakers do not like much about precision because it pins them down. And so they would rather go for some imprecision. And pangalawa, for many policymakers, their view of things are much wider than the view of the scientists. For most scientists, we are looking at a particular problem and then the associated variables that drive that problem. But policymakers are not focused on only specific problems. There are so many interests, national interests, that come into the picture that it is very difficult for them to be reductionist in their attention, that as if the concerns of the scientists or as how scientists see things would be the way to go. So that's the first issue. And really the second issue is that in the national discourse of things, policy making is just not attuned to the interest only of science. Kasi national interests are just so much wider than the interest of science. But if we breach that and get science to more informed policy making, then hopefully policy making will be based on, ito yung sinasabi, science and rights-based policy in the West Philippine Sea.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. I couldn't agree more. When it comes to space technology, Director General Marciano, may we also hear from you?
Maybe I'll answer it a bit broadly at the beginning. Scientists and engineers, they're researchers, scientific researchers, they're predisposed to thinking that their outputs tend to be more of inventions or papers and patents, etc. That's well and good. I think that needs to be supported more. And there's a lot that needs to be done in our country to make them more productive. I think it's a question of productivity. But ever since moving to or being part of the space agency, I still have a luxury sometimes of meeting with graduate students and PhD students, master students, and they keep you on your toes. But we tell now our colleagues, you know what, an output of a scientist could also be geared towards more policies, and do not consider that as something like you're less of a scientist if you do not produce or support policy that enables further productivity for the scientific enterprise, for example. So one thing that we have made it a conscious effort to weigh in on, being part of the space agency, the Director General of PhilSA is also a member of the Government Procurement Policy Board, the GPPB. This is the main policy-making body for public procurement in the country. Perhaps the framers of the law anticipated the challenges that the space agency in the Philippines would face in terms of public procurement and using public funds to build infrastructure, not just on Earth, but in space, and deliver services. But we kind of articulated the concerns of the scientific enterprise in terms of how we can be more productive, and translated that into inputs into the now signed new Procurement Reform Act. So I think more of our scientists, engineers, of course, that's not really their main jobs, but they need to cite case studies and use cases of how, in our case, the things that we procure are the ultimate non-common use goods in the country, wherein perhaps we might be thinking of these things as widely available. But no, they don't come here. Why don't they come here? Because how many of you are here? Then we ask them, how can there be many of us if you don't come here and do these things? So it's that vicious cycle that needs to be broken. And this is one way that we can articulate. So I think that's one way. We need to have more of our scientists weigh in somehow. Maybe we should perhaps, I don't know, have more of them run for public office, perhaps. But certainly in administrative positions, UP has been contributing. I am seconded from the university. There are many of us on secondment appointment from the university borrowed by government agencies. So we try to learn and apply what we know towards policies as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General Marciano. I think it's an important point of bringing down this vast body of knowledge into something more practical and real, being used in actual policy making, which is procurement. So we know that a lot of these are capital intensive, and if we really want to move forward and protect our maritime interests, then government processes like procurement have to be transformed based on what we know. Undersecretary 𝗏𝗂𝗿𝗆, I'm sure you have some challenges and stories as well at the Department of Energy on gaps connecting science and technology and policy making.
Thank you, Christine. Actually, I'm happy to say that the Department of Energy is a policy-making body. So when it comes to policy making, there is no issue here. So the policy that the Department of Energy is making is being implemented by the attached agencies, like the Philippine National Oil Company, like the Philippine National Oil Company Exploration Corporation, like the National Power Corporation, and others. But again, the challenge is there is in the implementation, that once implemented, you always expect opposition. You always expect resistance. Like policy on the moratorium on coal-fired power plants. Right now, there are some oppositions coming up. Like the policy on going nuclear. You will never have a 100% agreement on going nuclear. There will always be naysayers on that. So again, Christine, as far as policy making is concerned, we make the policy, but the major challenge actually is the implementation and then the reaction.
So I think that's another important point. Policy making is one matter, implementation is totally a different one. And they say that the Philippines has the best laws and policies in place, but we need to strengthen our implementation and monitoring to make sure that we do realize the intent of those policies and laws that we have. So Undersecretary 𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗏, perhaps you can go back later to on how to better implement those policies that the DOE has already in place. But before that, we can proceed with question number 2. And the question is, what investments should be made to optimize the contributions of our scientific community to the promotion of our maritime interests and the protection of our maritime domain? I think this is a good segue to the DOST program of Balik Scientists, where they're encouraged, our scientists overseas are encouraged to go back to the Philippines and contribute more to our development as a country. So when it comes to marine sciences, Dr. Malayang, do you have any ideas on how we could operationalize these investments and entice them to contribute more?
In general, doing marine science research, if it were to be done really exhaustively and well, takes a lot of money. It's not like doing science over land, because we are a land domiciling animal. But to do it in the sea, you need a lot of investments on both equipment as well as personnel. That is the reason why, for a vast area of sea, such as, say, the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, the investment will be very, very high to really know what we exactly have in those areas. You cannot manage something you do not know. And to know a lot of the life systems, including the ecological interactions of these life systems in this body of water, takes a lot of resources. That was the reason why I was saying that perhaps an open science program is a way to go. Because an open science program would mean that many other countries and many other entities, other than just those in the Philippines, can contribute towards doing the necessary research and scientific activity that are in themselves expensive. So maging collective effort yung scientific activity na yan. And I believe that once we know more about the value, our heritage value, our pamana from out of our oceans, policy will come in and immediately look for ways to make sure that we are able to sustain this value. Right now, my feeling is policy is not very sensitive to doing investments on marine science and marine ecological protection because they do not know exactly, we're not fully informed of the real value of these seas to us. We're more looking at the brown environment, which is very visible to us, but not the inner space. By the way, there's now a sense of outer space as against doing studies under the sea. They call that inner space. In fact, in the University of Rhode Island, we have a so-called inner space center. It's almost like a NASA thing. So anyway, the point here is it's very, very expensive. And for a country like the Philippines to invest fully on it would probably be impossible. But there is something else that we can do. Partnership. Together through an open science program, as has been done in the Antarctica, has been done in the Arctic, and in many other regions in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. Director General Marciano, you mentioned about the Copernicus project earlier. Can we do something similar?
Okay, well, we use that framework of the space value chain. I mean, in terms of the question being what investments are needed, perhaps I think before that we can say, could we look at something where we can prioritize where investments are going to be made, and then subsequently you determine how much investments there are. So for us at the space program, we look at that chain and then we try to build commensurate strength in each block of the chain and in their nexus so that we can realize the socioeconomic benefit and value. So for example, in terms of investments where we should put in is we're ingesting a lot of data. And as a country, we aspire to be a knowledge economy and our decisions to be science and evidence-based, but this requires infrastructure. One area of investment that I think we should build further is on computing. Because we have people who are now specializing on downstream data science, data analytics, AI, everybody's talking about it, but you need these high-performance computers. So when PhilSA builds out in New Clark City, part of that infrastructure will include a federated high-performance computing facility that will be open to universities, and we will share resources so that we can crunch these numbers. Now, on something a bit more immediate that we can do is when we teach computer literacy to young children in high school, we should show them maps. We should show them satellite images in their localities, for example, because they can contribute to labeling these satellite images, and they will contribute to training data for artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. The way you teach a person how to use a computer is not by pointing out a mouse or a keyboard, but look, this is a satellite image over your city, which was generated by satellites, perhaps by Philippine sovereign satellites or Copernicus, other free and open data, and they can contribute. So we are working on a module which we hope to bring to the DepEd, where we can bring these materials to the desks of young children, and they identify rice fields, coconut trees, mango trees, areas where certain crops are planted, and that all contributes to this national ecosystem of data. So I think investments that support that effort, where we can leverage more data, whether it's from space or from aerial and other sources on the ground, validation is also important. We did that for a mangrove map validation. We together with DNR, a few weeks ago, we released the nationwide mangrove map, knowing that there will be mistakes in the map because it was generated by AI. So basically, it was click of a button, generate the map, there it is. But there were 8 months of data preparation and cleansing before that, before you could click that button. But knowing that there'll be mistakes, we said counterintuitively, release it to the public, and then with the challenge of validating it. That's where communities were engaged. I think so. These things we can do. I know there is now. Then we discover more investments that need to be made to foster these kinds of activities. So they started contributing data back, and we hit our target with DNR. So this will now be a school project, validating mangrove maps. Next, we will have seagrasses. A bit more challenging. So maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think those are exciting projects, and now we're seeing more collaboration among agencies and stakeholders in the country. Does DOE also have, yes, Undersecretary
Yes,
Bacordo?
that's right, Christine. I would like to make a comment on the protection of the maritime domain. I mentioned earlier about offshore wind projects, and then also ocean energy projects. This offshore wind project, the fixed bottom will be fixed on the bottom, and then the floating will be anchored to the sea. So before going to any of these projects, we have commissioned this marine spatial planning, which is being conducted now by the BVG Associates of UK. And this is a 6-month study. The results we're expecting by maybe this October. And in that study, it will indicate there where are the areas that we cannot go to. Where are the protected areas, fishing, environment, where are the area shipping zones, and so many others. So that does it mean to say that we have this 92 service contracts, they can already put their wind turbines there? No. We have to wait for that marine spatial planning as a way of protecting our maritime domain, so that it will be sustainable, not only for this generation, but also for the next.
Kudos to the DOE. I think that's what we may call a responsible utilization of our marine resources when it comes to our energy, addressing our energy requirements. Now, I believe we have only a limited time left, so I'm seeing a number of questions being posed, but I don't think we have the time. So if I may beg the indulgence of the audience, I will give the remaining time to our panelists to give their last words. So if that is okay, Dr. Balayang, you've been opening the answering the questions for the past two. So we'll start with Undersecretary Bacordo from DOE, PhilSA, and then you, Dr. Ben.
Okay. Right now, we have seen massive interest in renewable energy in the Department of Energy. In fact, in a Bloomberg MEF report, they mentioned that the Philippines ranks number 4 in the world when it comes to renewable energy investments. That's after China, India, and Chile. And then in a Board of Investments report, we have breached the 1.4 trillion mark when it comes to investments. We have even overtaken the record last year, and this is just September. And this is because, again, of renewable energy. Renewable energy requires a lot of investments. To give you an example, one offshore wind project may run in the amount of about $15 billion US. So we in the department, we in government, we have to create that environment in order to invite foreign investors and local investors to come in and go into this renewable energy. Because renewable energy, for me, translates to energy security. And that is, for me, the way to go, so that in the future, we will not be dependent on any foreign country for our energy requirements.
Very well said, Undersecretary Bacordo. Director General Marciano.
In the Philippine space policy, it is written that the country has a central goal. The Philippines has a central goal of becoming a space-capable, spacefaring nation. In fact, within the next decade. So that gives us a little short of 6 years before we reach 2019. The law was passed in 2019. But then, we are already spacefaring because we do operate spacecraft, wherein we command this spacecraft and we tell it what to do. So in a sense, in the absence of astronauts, not yet, we don't have it. When we get asked, will we have astronauts? It's not a question of whether we will have one. It's a question of how many we will have, I think, as a country. Certainly that domain is something very strategic for a country like the Philippines, where we need to build the body of science that supports the work of the astronauts, contributing to the betterment of society. But then we also, do we have rockets? Not yet. Our country has geographic advantages for spaceports. We face a vast body of water to the east. We're not talking about the west this time, we're talking about the east. And that's the Pacific Ocean. You fly rockets in that direction. And to save fuel, you need to go to geostationary transfer orbit. You want to be nearer the equator. We have places in the country that are near the equator. So our proposed space industrial policy will leverage these geographical advantages of the country to put up industrial zones where we invite investments and develop local talent through universities and companies here that will be in the supply chain. Not just for satellites that go into space, but instruments that bring these things to space. Taking advantage, we have to take advantage. So we're celebrating Maritime Archipelagic Nation Month. We talk about challenges, but there are also advantages of being maritime and archipelagic and being where we are. And we have to seize that. So I think using this new dimension of space will open new doors for the country. And we'd like to thank all of you for the support so far for this young agency. Come visit us. We are at the 29th floor of Cyber One building. Soon we will also occupy the 30th floor. We are 250 people now. The average age is 27 years old. Meet these young Filipinos who are eager to contribute to the country and make us a stronger nation through space cooperation and space capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and more power to PhilSA. Dr. 𝗵𝗂𝗂𝗏.
The Arbitral Tribunal has established the Philippines' rights over the West Philippine Sea. The first thing that we need to probably understand is what would be the object of those rights. These rights over the West Philippine Sea means knowing the resources in the West Philippine Sea, whether living resources or non-living resources, including energy potentials, so that we can fully know exactly what will be covered by our rights. It takes science to be able to do that. And good science means better and wider application of science in all aspects of knowing about what's under the water in the West Philippine Sea. And so, while science could inform policy and science inform diplomacy, science can also be an object of policy. And science can also be the modality of diplomacy. And I am hoping that the Philippine government and all of these other partner in the international community, we look at science as a full investment on improving our pamana, our heritage, not only for Filipinos, but all coastal states and community around the South China Sea.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. And on that note, I think this has been a very empowering session. We were not only able to discuss the challenges and the gaps. I think the most important part of our discussion was the options that the country has to not just to harness our maritime resources, but using science and technology to foster cooperation as well with other countries. So with that, thank you very much to the audience, to our distinguished panel members, and I will be handing the floor back to Attorney Karen.
Thank you, Director Carino, and to our esteemed guests. So again, thank you to Director Carino and to our esteemed second round of panelists, Dr. 𝗵𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏, Director General Marciano, and Undersecretary 𝗠𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗏. A round of applause for our second panel. May we request once again Undersecretary Madriaga, Vice Admiral Alano, Secretary Centino on stage to give us the honor of presenting the tokens to our distinguished speakers. you. And at this moment, I would like again to invite everyone to participate in a photo opportunity with our second panel. So, Director. Thank you so much. As we conclude this morning's sessions, it is my honor to invite to the floor Secretary Andres Centino, Presidential Assistant for Maritime Concerns. Please, let's give him a warm round of applause. Thank you, sir.
Excellencies from the Diplomatic Corps, Vice Admiral Alano of the Foundation for National Interest, government officials, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, magandang tanghali sa ating lahat. Good afternoon to everyone. At the outset, may I thank the organizers of this event, the Waypoints Project, the Department of National Defense, the Foundation for National Interest, for extending the invitation for our office to join this event this morning. May we also thank the Australian aid for the support in making this forum possible. This show of collective effort among various agencies definitely contributes in raising public awareness of our maritime identity and in increasing everyone's understanding of the importance of the whole of nation approach in maritime governance. This forum is part of the month-long celebration of the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month. We aptly call it MANAMO, which is observed every month of September. And this is in line with Presidential Decree 316, which was signed in 2017, which synchronizes the observance of various maritime events, including the Fish Conservation Week, the International Coastal Cleanup Week, and the National Maritime Week. As a maritime and archipelagic nation, the Philippines, as most of us already know, with more than 7,000 islands, and we are a country surrounded by over 36,000 kilometers of coastline, making our country as having the fourth longest coastline in the world. And even though our islands are separated, our waters connect us with each other. Our maritime domain is actually 7 times larger than our land territory combined. Our waters are rich in biodiversity, facilitate trade, and provide lanes for transportation. And importantly, it serves as a source of livelihood for a significant majority of our people, giving the ocean industry an estimated 857 billion pesos worth of share in the country's gross domestic product. The rich resources from our waters are key to national prosperity and development. We can therefore say that our waters are our lifeline. The theme for MANAMO 2024 is Pamana ng Karagatan para sa Kinabukasan, Ating Ingatan, where we highlight the valuable resources offered by our waters which sustain our history, our social interactions, and our livelihood. Thus, it is our collective responsibility to protect and enrich these resources for the benefit of the present and future generations. In the face of maritime challenges, we Filipinos must hold the obligation to secure our maritime heritage from internal and external threats for generations of Filipinos in the years to come. As we close MANAMO 2024, allow me to express my appreciation to all the participating agencies which have spearheaded various projects and activities with the ultimate goal of promoting our maritime and archipelagic interests. This morning's panel discussions have greatly contributed to widening the conversations on how we should protect the Philippines' maritime domain and the role of science and technology in maritime security. We look forward to this afternoon's discussion on the blue economy. And certainly today's topics demonstrate how maritime security is interconnected with the different sectors of society. It is not confined only to defense and security and the diplomatic and foreign affairs domains, but also has far-reaching implications across various sectors, including energy, the environment, space, agriculture, and even local governance. Indeed, safeguarding the Philippine maritime and archipelagic interests is a collective and whole of national effort. Today is the last day of September, hence the last day of the month-long celebration of MANAMo. However, it is our expectation that the efforts that we take in advocating awareness of the nation's maritime identity shall continue in the days to come for as long as it takes, until our commitment and resolve to preserve our maritime resources is strengthened and our collective actions to protect our rich maritime heritage is unified. Sana ay magsilbing paalala ang selebrasyon ng MANAMO na tayo ay magtulong-tulong, magsama-sama at magkaisa na mahalin ang ating karagatan at ang mga yaman na sakop nito. Pahalagahan natin ang pamana ng ating mga karagatan, hindi lang para sa atin, kundi pati na rin sa susunod na henerasyon. Ang pamana ng karagatan para sa kinibakasan ating ingatan. Maraming salamat and happy MANAMO sa ating lahat.
We will now pause for a lunch break. Lunch will be served and we shall resume our third and last panel at 1:50 p.m.